Hello, everybody in Britlit. This is Mr. Nichols. The reason I'm recording this is because I realized, and I've probably already in class told you that this video exists, and I probably already talked about the reason. But essentially, we didn't really have time to cover the, sorry, that was the itch, cover the critical evaluation in class. And so I wanted to do instead was essentially like give you a short explanation of it now, read through the sample paper, then have like a really full-on explanation of it in case you need more, so that if it's very confusing, you can spend all that extra time you want skipping through the video and finding the parts that kind of help you understand what it is that I'm wanting from you. And I think that that's going to be just as good as, like, say, if we do it in class. Because for the most part, I think people can take the sheet that's on Blackboard, read it, look at the sample paper, and say, okay, I'm ready to go. Some people want a little more, and that's what this video is for. And then if people want a little more, I've got basically, for my 1302 class, I do a full breakdown. I read a tiny little short story, we talk about it, we break it down. Then I pick a piece of it that I analyze, and then I essentially take you through the process of the analysis and sort of what direction I would go for that paper, without actually writing the paper, because I didn't want to necessarily do that. I didn't really have time to do that in a class. So that's what will follow. Okay, it's going to be this video of me looking at the assignment, explaining the assignment, then a video from another class, 2 separate videos, like a whole week's worth of classes, like an hour and 15 minutes here, hour and 15 minutes there, talking about how to do the critical evaluation in more detail if you need that. Okay, so that's what this is. So let's start off by going to the assignment page. So I'm going to log in as Magnus Baraka here. And I'm going to go to our class, Britlit. I'm going to go over here to assignments, because you may have noticed already that the critical evaluation essay has popped up. It's there. And maybe you noticed that, maybe you didn't, but it's there. It's in PDF. So we can click the PDF. And when we do so, you see right here it says it's technically due on week 7, day 2. But because you're not seeing this video probably until at the earliest, like week 6, day 1, and I didn't talk about the assignment in class till week 6, day 1, you can feel free to turn it in on week 8, day 1, if that's any easier for you. Or even like the Sunday prior to that, later than week 7, day 2, but still earlier than what I said before. But what happens is I've assigned it on week 5, day 2, do week 7, day 2, or the other possible date that I just gave you just now. And you're supposed to pick one of the assigned literary readings from the semester, just like you do with the synthesis analysis. But it has to be a different reading than you've done the synthesis analysis over. So you can do the synthesis analysis over one reading, synthesis analysis 2 over another. Critical evaluation has to be over yet another, so it can't be over the same reading you've done so far. I would suggest against doing Shakespeare's sonnets. I've not seen it work out very well for those who've tried. You can do it if you want the extra degree of difficulty, but it's just something that's so short, it tends not to work very well with it. So essentially what you do is you pick a literary reading, and then I ask you to write a critical evaluation essay for a specific aspect of that literary reading. Technically, it can be just an aspect, but I say that the best way to approach it is the critical evaluation should unfold or unpack the meaning and workings of a literary text by looking at a very small selection, such as a sentence, a phrase, or a word, from the work, and analyzing that piece in context of the author's purpose and or the text as a whole. And it says your essay should have so basically I want you to pick a small piece of that and then extrapolate the meaning from that. So you actually could do the original language on something like, the Canterbury Tales, or maybe Sir Gawain if you can figure the language out. I wouldn't suggest doing it with Beowulf because the language is so indecipherable. It's not something you can read in its original text and understand what you're reading. Whereas Canterbury Tales you can with enough effort. So I don't want people picking the plain English version as their selection. You need to pick the original text version only um, of anything that you choose. So once you do that, you're essentially going to unfold and unpack the meanings of that small selection you've chosen and show that basically not if the selection were removed from the story or the tale or the poem that the poem would be different, but if different words were chosen, if the same meaning was conveyed but with different words, then the meaning of the literary work would not be achieved at as succinctly. That's essentially what I'm wanting you to try to argue. So you're basically going to say that this piece is incredibly important to achieving meaning in the poem for the author. And this essay will have a strong thesis, unlike the prior two papers, and the rest of the paper should clearly support that thesis. I want you to try to provide compelling thoughts about the themes and subject matter, as well as show true insight through closely reading one small piece of the work. But I don't want you to analyze the author's ideas from a personal standpoint like you did with the census analysis, only from an intertextual, like everything is contained within the document, source of logic. And I don't want you to talk about whether the author is ultimately right or wrong about their opinions on certain subjects. It's irrelevant here. It's all about like you objectively talking about this is the author's purpose. This helps him achieve that purpose. And you kind of think of this as though it's like a dissection in which you're trying to discover the many purposes and achievements of one small organ within a full organism. And I'm most impressed if you don't pick something like quite so obvious like the head. You know, like, well, I think that the head is pretty important to the function of the human body. Well, I mean, duh. I'd be more impressed with something like, say, the liver, which has various functions, or even something like thyroid gland, you know, which is yet even more, like, smaller, but I mean, without it, a lot of things go wrong in the body. So try to pick something small, seemingly doesn't seem to matter. Don't pick something that literally does not matter, like, say, an appendix. Like, you can live without that. But try to find something that is incredibly important, and the author chose those words for a reason, it seems. The formatting is the same for all my essays so far, so just however you formatted it before, do that. The length is 600, 800 words, but I noticed most papers tend to be, they get A's or over 700 words. They tend to run a little longer than, it's like 2.5 pages. You only have to use a works cited page if you're not using the Norton Anthology book as the source for your text. And in every single case, you should be, because even if you're doing Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, if you're citing the original text, that's all available in Canterbury Tales. So even if you're using the online as a reference point to find the line number, you can then look that line number up in the Norton Anthology, so it shouldn't be an issue. And it says on this sheet here that I have that you're welcome to cite outside sources as well, but it's not required unless you decide you want to use their information. I'm going to change that. I don't want you to use outside sources at all for this assignment, none at all. I want you to try to do as much as you can with your own mind and do the critical thinking on your own, and come to the conclusions on your own. So, oh, by the way, I want to apologize for my dress. It's a football game tonight. And my daughter's in band. So, let's see. Yeah, let's look at the grading stuff. It says clearly express your main point through a concise, capable thesis. Present ample detail to prove your thesis from the literary reading chosen. Find a wealth of meaning through exploring one small aspect of the reading. Speak about necessary plot elements without ever summarizing the entire plot, and have a properly formatted works cited page if you need it. Now the hint here is try to come up with an original idea. Don't just regurgitate things I've said in class. And additionally, make sure to pick a very small piece of a larger work, show its importance to the whole, preferably by looking at individual words from the piece you've chosen. So the sample paper that I included is actually about a story we haven't read. It's Rose for Emily. You may remember it from the other class. Essentially, Rose for Emily was about some woman in the town, she's recently died, so they're about to go to the funeral, and some member of the town starts talking about how kooky she was and starts recounting like what she was like. And they said, hey, you need to start paying taxes, but their family had been there for so long, and some old mayor had told them you don't have to pay taxes ever because of the contributions your family made to the town, that we won't even require you to do that. And as they came later, the later generations were like, well, no, they need to pay taxes. she kept saying, "I'm not paying taxes. You can go see the colonel." They're like, "Ma'am, he's been dead for," and it just kind of went like that. So she was very stubborn. She was very defiant. Um, her house got smelly one time, so they sprinkled lime outside. She ended up having a boyfriend it seemed once, but then that kind of fell through. She went and asked for arsenic because she had a rat problem. Um, and then like 10 years, 15 years went by after the dude left her, and they all felt really sorry for her, and then she died. Now, when they went in their house at the end, they found that the arsenic they thought had been used to poison the rats, and the lime that they sprinkled outside the house to make the smell go away, wasn't actually for rats. It turns out that the guy that they thought left her, the boyfriend, he apparently was poisoned by her because I guess he was going to leave and she stopped him. And she kept him in the bed and she slept next to his body for about 15, 20 years, maybe longer. And he decomposed completely and just had like leather-like skin on his surface, and the bedclothes on top of it. But she slept next to his dead body the whole rest of her life, which is pretty messed up. So that story, this student found this sentence: "Only Miss Emily's house was left, lifting its stubborn and coquettish decay above the cotton wagons and gasoline pumps, an eyesore among eyesores." I was really impressed with the sentence choice, although I was also a little wary when I first read it because I didn't remember this sentence being in the story. I looked up the story. I did like a find for the word coquettish. Sure enough, it's in the story, like in the first couple paragraphs, and I was like, all right. And I checked my textbook to be sure. It was in there. I said, whatever. Like, I'm not sure how you're going to prove to me that this sentence is important. It just sounds like some description of setting. And so she goes on and says, and by the way, this is the only 100 I've ever used as a sample paper. You can see down here it got a 100. So I really think this is achievable by normal people. But the degree to which she thinks about content is so deep that I ended up giving her 100. And usually people who get hundreds have like really elevated language that's sometimes hard for most students to read, so I don't include those as sample papers. But this student, it seemed like, almost, what's the Ratatouille, where there's that book, Anyone Can Cook, and it's almost like that. I feel like anyone could write this essay, assuming that they thought about the content enough. So there's a piece of dust up on my camera. I gotta see if I can get that. Apologize. That must look really weird on the camera. So it starts out, from the very beginning of his short story, Faulkner loses the emphasis on the symbolism of the house and its owner, as well as foreshadows what will happen later on in the story. Faulkner does all of this through a small description depicting a part of the story's setting. This simple sentence introduces why the house Miss Emily occupies is one of the most important symbols throughout the story. Okay, so at this point I wasn't that impressed. I was like, okay, so it's what? That the house is a symbol for Miss Emily? Because it's an old house in an old neighborhood, or old house surrounded by new surroundings. And Miss Emily is an old woman surrounded by new progressive people. So I mean, I was like, okay, that's a pretty standard interpretation of the story. So I was looking like, okay, maybe she'll just, clear an A, and that's about it. And she says, in the words preceding the chosen phrase above, the environment around the house is described. It's especially important to notice how the description of the atmosphere around the house is new and progressive, whereas the house itself is a complete contrast of that ideal. Simply put, the house does not fit into the surroundings. It does not belong with the ambiance of the cotton wagons and gasoline pumps. The house sticks out in what most people in the town would agree to be a displeasing way. I was like, yeah, that's pretty standard. It's very well put. But the surroundings are new and progressive, house old, and I think, okay, she's about to compare Miss Emily to it. The house represents Miss Emily herself. Shocker. She is seen as an outcast in her town, specifically in the time period where most young women were out getting married and starting families, because she is known as being a recluse. To the townspeople, Miss Emily is seen as an eyesore. And see, I like this so far. She chose this quote and said, I'm actually impressed so far because she chose this quote and said this quote is really important to the story, helps it achieve meaning, and that these words specifically that were chosen are important to the meaning. And she points that out by she quotes the cotton wagons and gasoline pumps earlier when talking about how the surroundings are new and progressive, so that I can see, with my eyes what she's talking about. Again, she talks about how Miss Emily is seen, like the house, as an eyesore. She's a kind of a blot on the town. And so I like how she's bringing these words back up and saying, look, see this, and using evidence. And she says, as most people conclude, eyesores tend to be popular topics of discussion. That's true. This is ironic given that even though the townspeople would rather personally ignore exceptions to their social ideals, it is in their nature to publicly confer about it, thus giving Miss Emily's seemingly insignificant way of living an even greater significance. It does not help that they already set themselves apart from her because of her family's history of being in a higher social status. So, I mean, I think it was a pretty compelling idea, and I won't go through the whole thing I usually go through, but essentially, there's many times in life where we say, "Oh man, that person is an outsider. We don't like that person. They're such an eyesore on the town. They're such a blot." Yet we spend a lot of time talking about those people, don't we? The people who don't fit within our social ideals end up, you know, taking up a huge amount of our thoughts and our judgment time. I mean, we spend a lot of time thinking about them. And so she kind of points that out in the next paragraph and continues that idea. She said the house's stubborn and coquettish description is how the town views Miss Emily. Even though they know she's a nice girl of significant upbringing and background, her solitary lifestyle is not a common one at the time, and because she has shown no signs of changing it, they assume that she is obstinate in living that way. Her reclusive behavior then becomes an almost accepted part of the society, if only because it provides something to talk about. Just as the house stands out among its industrial surroundings, the people cannot change it, so instead they find entertainment at its expense. They especially find pleasure in the fact that without her follower around to keep her a well-rounded young lady, she has brought her family's name down from its status, very much like how the house was once a regal portion of the neighborhood and now stands as a blemish on the town. This is a super compelling idea. That essentially, like, think about all stories that we have. There's always a villain, isn't there? We need villains. We watch Infinity War and we see Thanos, and if Thanos wasn't there, what happens? Nothing. We need the villains in stories. They're very important. Those who bring about the negatives help those who consider themselves to be the positives almost like develop a sense of camaraderie. It's a united front against one thing. However, in this ability to create a united front, we all kind of look at that person and we go, oh man, aren't they the worst? They are, aren't they? Golly. In that, we also elevate that person's level of importance. There's a movie I love called The Watchmen, and essentially one character is chosen by a number of the other characters to essentially be the scapegoat for the goodwill of the rest of the earth. So everybody's able to kind of get along because they choose this one person as the scapegoat for all of their problems. They say, this person's the cause of all of our problems. We're going to put that all on them and complain about that one person. And it helps people sort of get along. So in a sense, we have that in society. We have that thing where we take certain people, we outcast them, or talk about them as outcasts, and then we're able to maintain unity as a result of that outcasting. And it's sad that we do this, but it's very compelling that she noticed that we do this. I'm sure you've noticed as somebody around Greenville who walks around and they have like a strange walk, and we used to get calls about them at Hastings when I used to work there all the time, and how they were being like a nuisance and a disturbance. But man, we all had these great stories about her, and we would tell them to each other. And a lot of people, I think, were complaining. Me, I was just more like, man, this individual's unique. And I'm really glad that I had this person to tell stories about. And there was people like that in commerce as well. I'm sure you had people like that in high school. But once those people are gone out of your lives, you really feel like something's missing, even if you don't want to. So anyways, I was really impressed with the paper at this point. It's probably going to get an A, and a little more than an A for having gone a little deep with that idea. But then I get this next paragraph. If you want to get like a 97, 98 on a paper, wow me once. Make me go, wow, that's impressive. This one wows me twice. She says, although the word decay seems to be an insignificant part of the sentence, upon further inspection it becomes very striking. The story ends with the revealing of the rotting corpse of Miss Emily's ex-fiancé, her sick personal keepsake of her lover. After reading the end of the story and going back to the phrase describing the house, readers can find that there was obviously more to it than just not fitting in. The decay in the sentence not only displays that it was an old house on the outside, but also represents what will literally be inside the house, a decaying body. In going with the symbolism of the house, it could also represent that Emily herself had decay, which would be her obviously corrupted mind for thinking it was able to poison, or acceptable to poison someone to death, to be able to keep them forever. I tried to do something physical and I screwed up my talk. I was blown away by this. So not only did she give me like those which we outcast in society become an accepted part because they give us something to talk about. She's also giving me this word decay is not thrown into the sentence at the beginning of the story haphazardly. It's meant to be this subtle bit of foreshadowing that is leading you to essentially get this tone of decay, of nastiness, so that you're led to possibly suspect, even tonally, that eventually at the end of the story we're going to see this decaying body. And if we didn't see the decaying body, we had a perfect excuse for why we should have started thinking about it right here at the beginning. And the decay was sort of a mood in the story that just continued. I was very, very impressed by this. I didn't notice that. I read the sentence right before I started this. I went, yeah, okay. Didn't even think about the fact the word decay was there. And this is how I want you to approach the paper. Think about this. This quote up here could have said, only Miss Emily's house is left, living in stubborn and coquettish decay above the cotton wagons and gasoline pumps, an eyesore among eyesores. That's what it says. It could say, only Miss Emily's house is left, living in stubborn and coquettish disrepair above the cotton wagons and gasoline pumps, an eyesore among eyesores. I imagine Faulkner thought about this story for, if not many tens of hours, maybe 100 hours or more. And in choosing the words in the story, he did it very thoughtfully. I mean, the guy won a Nobel Prize in literature for the things that he did for essentially literature as a pursuit. I really think that she's right. I don't think that the word decay would have been thrown in haphazardly. This is a guy who knows. He actually started the idea of the story with the single hair that's on the pillow at the end from showing that Miss Emily laid next to this dead body. So he knew he was starting with the death before he ever started writing. The word decay would not just be thrown around. He would have known that there was a decaying body at the end. So if he uses the word decay, it's not going to surprise him later and go, oh, I used that word? That's shocking. He definitely meant this to be a part of the story and something that we should have seen. So I was really, really impressed with this. And when she gets to the conclusion, she kind of truncates bits of this sentence so she doesn't have to say the whole thing again. It says, the irony is that Miss Emily was ostracized for being different, but the way people thought she was different turned out to be relatively normal compared to the reality of what she was like. Faulkner designed the phrase, only Miss Emily's house was left, an eyesore among eyesores, and she put the ... to kind of keep herself from having to requote the whole sentence, to perfectly represent how Miss Emily's house and herself are tied together, both literally from her living in it, and symbolically by the way the house is snubbed by the people of the town, as well as the stubborn and decay aspects both the house and Miss Emily possess. It's really interesting. I left that misspelling of the word possess at the end because I found it kind of quirky. She did have a mistake, and I gave her 100 because to me the content was so great. Even that little accidental mistake at the end didn't hurt her that bad. It didn't hurt her at all. So it's 678 words, an incredibly efficient paper. I rarely have any of them that are getting A's, going 750 even. And the grade was 100, so I considered it to be, it wowed me so much in such a short space. Took something that I thought was just simple, made it incredibly complex. That's really what I'm looking for in this paper, is that you can take something that seems sort of innocuous and make it seem incredibly important to achieving purpose and meaning in the story for the author. And I'm most impressed, like I say, by the innocuous. If you end up choosing a smaller poem, you don't want to go with something like Chaucer's Canterbury Tales or King Lear. Instead of a sentence, I'll want you to choose something appropriate for the length of that poem, which is what makes the sonnet so hard. You can't go with 4 lines of a 14-line poem. I mean, of course those are important. I mean, it's 30%. Instead, you would need to go with like maybe a word and talk to me about how important that individual word is to achieving meaning and purpose in the poem. And I don't want to like take a poem about love by Shakespeare and you pick the word love. I mean, that's duh. You get rid of the concept of love. What is this poem about love? It's nothing. So that's one of the reasons I suggest not picking the the sonnets by Shakespeare, is because sometimes I think the only choices you have are the obvious ones, and then they're too obvious, and so I'm never really impressed. But if you were to take a poem like Robert Frost's The Road's Not Taken, which you can't use, so I can safely talk about this, and you use the word sigh, because in a poem that he actually sighs, it says that he... So that's all you end up choosing as your word, and I'm sitting there going, well, how in the world can this stand for the whole meaning of the poem? And you go with that. then that'll work, because that's not the subject of the entire poem is a sighing. You're just trying to say that sigh, without that sigh, the whole poem can't achieve the meaning it's trying to do. Even if the sigh is put differently, even if it says it's a gasp, even if it says it's a breath. I mean, that particular word sigh is important for a reason. And so that's why I really don't think you should pick the shortest stuff unless you're super confident in your ability to think very, very openly and creatively about how to do just one word. Think of it like a dissection, like I said before. Be very analytical, clinical, scientific. Don't be personal with your opinions, like in the census analysis paper. I get more detail into that in the video that follows. And keep in mind, you don't have to use the specific terminology that the student used. Don't have to use setting, symbolism, foreshadowing. That's just what was available here to this student. You can use whatever other literary elements you think are going to help you make that case for why this little piece is so important. And do not, under any circumstances, copy the language of the student. A lot of people say, almost always people who take the language take that first paragraph and they say, a small description of the story is blah, blah, blah. I don't want you using the student's language. Write your own stuff. It's not a template. The formatting is correct. The content is what I'm wanting you to look for. I'm not wanting you to just say, okay, well, these words are the ones he wants me to use. No. Which I shouldn't have to tell you guys in Brit Lit. I mean, you're usually pretty upper echelon in terms of my student population anyway. But yes, that is essentially what I want you to do on the assignment. Focus on those things. If you feel like this was enough, you feel like you got it, oh, I understand, close focus, dissect, got it, then go ahead and get started. No need to continue on the video. But if you feel like I need more, I need to see, like Nichols, an example with a small short story that you look at, break down with the students in terms of plot, character, everything, and then choose a sentence based on the breakdown, and then after that, literally break down that sentence that you chose to show why that sentence was important in its exact form to creating meaning in the story. Because if you need to see all that because you don't feel comfortable with what I just talked about, feel free, continue on with the video. But that's not a requirement. And really, if you got enough from the sheet itself without even hearing me talk like this right now, I don't even know why I'm still talking to you then, because you're already not watching. No need to continue on the video anyway. So I hope this was helpful. Let me know if it was or wasn't helpful, if there's any changes I need to make in the future when I do something like this. Thank you so much. Bye-bye now. Sorry, it takes time to hit the stop button. If I know it's going to take me this extra time. It's ridiculous. Okay, so I started recording. Let's see what to talk about. Oh yeah, I know. Yeah, we're doing that, but I mean, like the stuff I need to talk about before that, or I guess ask. Oh wait, no, I do. I want to talk about the essays a little bit. So I haven't just graded a discussion post for the week yet, because I was going to do the essays first. I'm not able to stay awake this week. I mean, every night I sit down to grade, it's like 7, and I just keep like passing out.
Just do a little bit of cooking.
That'd be bad. What? I didn't say it. I mean, literally have me on tape going, no. So let's see. With that, I'm going to get them done as soon as I can. It might take until like maybe Friday evening to get those last ones done before I start grading the next essays.
Wait, so are you grading our synthesis analysis now?
Yes, I'm currently in the process of that, yeah. Then I might go ahead and do the discussion post right after I get everything done for this first round of essays, just so I've got those clean and out of the way. And then I'll do the
okay. I have a question.
Next papers. Yes.
About critical evaluation.
Okay, it may be covered by what we're going to talk about. We'll see.
I mean, I've got
go ahead and ask your question. Yeah.
But to be honest, it almost kind of sounds like it's an evaluation about how she writes it, but it's also kind of persuasive.
I mean, I don't know what you'd be persuading me of, unless you're persuading me that what you're saying is true.
Right.
But that's, yeah, anytime you're taking a thesis and making a claim, you're going to sound persuasive, I think, in some way.
Okay.
So, yeah, that very well could be the case.
Because basically I just said, like, the whole purpose of my quote that I used was to only give the reader one choice. I don't know. You'll just have to read it.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, it sounds decent, but I don't know if it's what you're looking for.
We'll see. If it's not, we can revise.
I mean,
Which you said last time. You're like, well, it'll be the first time I would revise it.
Yeah.
But there's a first time for everything. And I will say that this is probably the paper of all my papers that he will write, the lowest grade that students ever get across all my classes. They get on this paper. Usually we'll get a higher grade on the research paper than they get on this one. Well, people aren't used to me in school anymore. I feel like they're not making you closely examine literature anymore, or anything really. Let's just do a quick summary of everything, and that's what Wikipedia does. So I don't know why I even bother.
I had portions of it in there where like the word that she used, but I don't know.
Okay, we'll see.
I have it like here, so I'll look after it.
I usually don't do that. I can look at like a sentence or a specific
That's what
thing.
I mean. Yeah, don't read the whole thing.
Okay.
Because I know me.
If you have specific questions, I will answer.
Yeah.
That's generally what I do. So, question, Reyes? Oh yeah, in fact, let me say that to everybody. You can revise all the papers all the way through week 14, day 2, I think it is. So you can revise. You don't have to even do each one at a time. You can say, oh, I'll do the second one revision first. I'll do the research paper next, and then I'll go back and do those first other essays if I want to. So there's no actual time frame other than having to have them all done by the end of week 14, day 2. But yeah, you can get them done when man, I hate this computer. I think I might actually be able to buy one of my other computers again. It's not gonna have a page up, page down button, which kind of bothers me. I'll have to leave the num lock off most of the time. But I use the num lock off so randomly. Oh well. Y'all don't care. I'm just saying things. Okay, so I'm gonna try to go through this a little bit faster, this theme part, than I did in the other class. I don't know. Maybe that's not true. Because it's gonna take 2 days to cover the critical evaluation. And I don't think I can really even talk about the critical evaluation and what you're supposed to do until we talk about what theme is and what themes can be. Have we talked about theme at all in this class? Because I feel like you can get by with not talking about a number of different elements. I feel like a lot of the elements of literature are pretty intuitive to us. Things like I feel like a lot of us know like what plot is, like the events that take place in the story. Character, like we know how to look at characters and what characters are. Even if we don't know what these words mean, dynamic or static. I mean, dynamic means changing, static means stays the same, round means interesting, flat means boring. Even if y'all don't know that particular terminology, like a character might be more emphasized over another one. This one might go through an actual change throughout the course of the story versus instead of it staying exactly the same as they were when they started. Setting, I feel like people know the stuff about, like, how that setting works, and it's like when, where, the situation. I could talk to you about like Soldier's Home, how it's not just about how it's taking place, in Oklahoma. It's important to know that it's after World War I. He's come back. Everybody else hasn't gone. That situation is very important. He's seen the devastation, but here he's like in a land of plenty because it's like pre-Depression era Oklahoma. So all the aspects of that factor in. And it's supposed to be like dead center of America. So it's far as possible from the borders as you can be. There's no sense of war in Oklahoma at that time. I mean, everything's just great farming, lots of money. Everybody's doing well. So totally different world. So setting, I feel like y'all would get that kind of stuff in your stories. Point of view, like you probably naturally think, am I reading a first person or a third person? Like, is it the character talking or is it some narrator talking? You might realize whether or not it's mostly just giving you actions or whether or not it's giving you the inside thoughts of the characters, which is considered to be omniscient. Actions is objective. So without knowing, I think, even the terminology, you would kind of understand this stuff on a basic level. I think the stuff you'll understand the most, I feel like for whatever reason, people always look for symbolism. It's like a human thing. We want things to have meaning. So you start to look at like, oh, could this be a symbol? And you may not go into quite the detail that I might when I look at a story, like, or even colors can be symbols. Like in Chekhov's Study with the Pet Dog, almost all of my thoughts about the meaning of that story revolve around how important gray is. Gray is all over that story. She's always wearing gray. They're in a gray room. Her eyes are gray. His favorite dress of hers is gray. He sees his hair turning gray. Gray becomes incredibly important regardless of what it means. The carpet's gray. The bed is gray. That's not very sexy colors, but it's about cheating, so it's very strange. Irony is something I feel like a lot of us understand these days. Well, it's situational irony. I think when you think of something ironic, what do you think of? Give me an example of like a situation of irony. My guess would be something. Let's just say you're on the way to class today. You're hurrying because you know you're late. You get stopped, pulled over, you get a ticket. You arrive, class is canceled. You went through all that effort to get here, and boom, not even having class. So you did all this stuff and for nothing. So I feel like that's the kind of irony we all get. But there's other types of irony as well that people don't always know about, which is verbal irony. So anytime you're being sarcastic, you say something you don't actually mean. That's considered irony, especially, and also dramatic irony when we know something the characters don't. Essentially, irony is, at its core, like when something happens that's different than what you would expect to be the case. So when you expect to arrive to school when class is happening, and it doesn't, and all the stuff, the work that you put in for it, that's ironic. When I ask you, y'all can't wait to write this paper, right? And you're like, oh yeah, we're so excited for this paper, we love it.
It's the best.
That literally you're saying something that's not true. I mean, that's verbal irony. Or dramatic irony, like we don't often expect to know more than the characters do about their own situation, but sometimes that's the case. Dramatic irony happens in the middle part of occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. And sometimes it's to build suspense, sometimes it's so we go, oh no. Like, what's he doing here? Why is he being hung? And they're like, oh, he was hung because he got tricked by some North soldiers. We know that. Well, I mean, I guess he knows that. I guess probably the best example I have then of dramatic irony is, y'all know the movie How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days? Y'all heard of that? Here's the premise. Essentially, it's like she's writing a news article about how to get a guy to leave you in 10 days in a relationship. And he's got a bet with somebody that he can stay in a relationship with a woman for at least 10 days because he never has. He always gets rid of them faster than that.
No, it's to make her fall in love.
Or fall in love, okay.
It's a chick flick.
We know.
Whatever. But regardless, we know that both of them have those goals. Neither one of them know that each other has those goals. So she's doing everything she can to make him go away, and he's doing everything he can to not leave. So it's a lot of dramatic irony is what makes that whole movie interesting. And then we often, well, I'm sure, look at the title of a thing and go, oh, is the title important? Like, for example, when I look at Lady with a Pet Dog, it's not called Anna. It's not called Love.
They literally refer to her as Anna the whole time.
Sometimes
First and last name. They never just refer to her as Anna.
But I think it's called The Lady with the Pet Dog because I think it's sort of a cynical title. Because how do you distinguish this lady from all the other women he's had affairs with that are mentioned in the story? Well, this is the lady that had the pet dog. So when I get to do this story, I think that, people always in affairs, they think to themselves, this is going to work. We're going to do this. But it often doesn't. And often it's just something that they feel like will happen.
I feel like
yeah, it was later when
I
guess absence makes the heart grow fonder. And he goes, well, I wasn't able to let this thing naturally take its course. She went back, so now I'm suddenly obsessed with it. People. And then tone, we know the tone is the author's kind of opinion subtly displayed in the story. I mean, you can tell when you're reading Story of an Hour, that one that we read about. I mean, Charlotte Perkins Gilman, the Yellow Wallpaper, we can tell that story is not approving of the current medical practices. I mean, it's very much, we need to get this crap under control. This is not the way that medicine should work in America, or anywhere really. And we can feel that in the tone of the story, like that she's going crazy. It's because these men told her what she needs to do. So I feel like a lot of this stuff is somewhat natural to us. Maybe some of the stuff in there you were like, what is he talking about? If that's the case on one of these, write down which ones those are. And I've got whole PowerPoints that cover those aspects that are in the PowerPoint section of Blackboard. But the most important thing is that all of these sort of help us find theme. And theme is like essentially like a thesis in a story. There's not always just one either. I mean, so it's just essentially what is the purpose of that story? What is the meaning the author is trying to convey? That's what theme is. So the theme is a central idea or meaning of the story. I'm going to go ahead and probably keep sitting because I'm going to be working with Microsoft Word here not very long. And the book says to distinguish between the idea of, or maybe the book doesn't say this anymore, but it's important to distinguish between theme and subject. A theme is something said about the meaning of the story. A subject is just what the story's about. So, Lady with the Pet Dog, the theme might be love, right? Like what, and maybe all the stories this week, one subject of the story is love. Paper Menagerie, love. You know, what we talk about when we talk about love. I hate that name of that story. Yeah, it's so hard to remember and say. That one's about love. But, you know, you have other subjects can pop up as well. Like in Paper Menagerie, that story is also about family. So there can be multiple subjects and multiple meanings behind the story and the purpose of the story for the author using those subjects. I mean, it might assert something both about love and about family separately in Paper Menagerie. So I wrote some sample themes that I almost feel like it's easier to start and work our way backwards. So these are themes that I've written for at least each of these are, I try to design it to where it only works for one of the stories that we have. I try to distinguish it between other stories. Now there is one that the students have told me, they said that would kind of work actually for multiple ones. And I'll tell you which one I think that is. But I kind of want y'all to guess like what story each one of these goes with. We'll maybe start with that first one. So sometimes people cannot be helped or changed, only abided in love. Any idea what story that might go with?
Like a brother one?
Yeah, I think that's probably the best one. Because, yeah, Rich Brother, yeah. Because in that particular case, it's not necessarily just talking about family, I don't think. I mean, sometimes we know that there are people out there that we can't change. And I feel like that story could easily also apply to, like, say, romantic relationships or bosses at work. I mean, there are just people in life that you can't change. And maybe with a boss, it's more like abided or love, because you're not necessarily going to love a boss. But, you know, some of those times when people that you just can't change, you just sort of abide that person. You sort of, you know, not necessarily a word tolerate, abide is like trying to just deal with kind of thing. And love. Because he realizes it, and maybe at the end of the story, if he doesn't turn around, the whole meaning of that story changes. That theme no longer works. But since he turns around, he realizes it's important that he, you know, he's his brother. So he needs to, you know, abide him. To act selfishly is to abandon one's society. This one's maybe a little hard. Because I'm interpreting society, not necessarily in the big sense of society, but just the people who are around you. Those who surround you. That's what I was trying to hint you away from by saying I don't mean all of society. But in that case, really I don't think that in that case, to act selfishly in that story is not to abandon one's society, it's to improve one's society. So everyone acts selfishly in order to improve all of society. So that one, it sort of works the opposite. And I don't necessarily think that she shows anybody abandoning society and acting selfishly there.
Except for the homes.
Yeah, but true in that case, the people who are acting selfishly aren't doing it to abandon their society, they're doing it to improve it. What they are doing is to act selfishly is to abandon the health and well-being of some. So I don't think that one works perfectly for, at least not as I've written it, for Omelas. It does work, I think, pretty well for one of the stories. These don't necessarily have to be recent stories we've read. It could be older ones too.
Maybe soldiers?
Acting selfishly. Does he act selfishly? Who acts selfishly?
I think he kind of does, because he's like not wanting to do anything for himself, and then he doesn't want to conform to society, I guess.
It almost sounds like, in that story, society abandons him, and as a result, he starts to act selfishly. So it almost, in that case, is like, when society abandons you, you begin to act selfish.
That's kind of what happens in Paper Menagerie.
What about
Maybe a little bit.
Because they're judging him, they're judging his mom and everything, and then he gets embarrassed, and so he starts to abandon.
I don't think he abandoned all of society.
No.
He abandons just the people in his family.
Yeah.
So to act selfishly would abandon one's family. Because there's some people he's hanging out with and getting fun with.
Did it work for Rosewood?
That's what I was gonna say. What's for Emily?
And see that one, there's a little issue there because she'd already abandoned her society far before she started acting selfishly and killing somebody. Who acts the most selfish of anybody in any of the stories? I think that's maybe where you can start. Not just the killing somebody doesn't necessarily mean you're acting selfish. It just means that you,
Yeah, the lottery.
And that lady,
She starts to act
like,
she's like, it's
crazy
not fair,
because
it's not fair.
it's not fair. Because it's her.
But it is fair.
So you think that but then that makes the goal of the story essentially telling us that she was selfish and she should have just went through with it because the lottery's good. I don't necessarily get that
I don't
goal.
think because the lottery's good, but that's what their society is about. So.
This is what their society is about. This is about theme is about what the author is trying to convey to us. And I don't think that the author's saying she shouldn't have been selfish. She should just die. I don't know that that's what the author's trying to say.
What about the yellow swamp paper?
I don't necessarily. While she does sort of get abandoned by her society, I don't know that she's acting selfishly. It's that she's acting actually in the interests of her family, and that ends up not working out so well for her.
A good man is hard to find. That grandma was.
She was incredibly selfish. And does her selfish acts cause her to essentially abandon everyone around her?
Yes. Yep.
Yes, that's the one.
Okay.
Because that's what she does. She acts super selfish the whole story. Everything has to go her way all the time. Selfish, selfish, selfish. She gets to the end, and essentially they all start getting taken away and shot. She's like, please let me live. Just me.
She doesn't care about anybody else.
Yeah. She starts talking to him, almost preaching to the guy to try to get him to keep her alive.
Believe her son's life.
Yeah, that irritated. I don't know how she just sat there when
She's like, oh, they shot him.
Now there is one thing that happens in that story that can sometimes be confusing. People think that she's either she's trying to say, oh, you're my own boy, you're my child. And some people think that actually means that he's the misfit is her child. That's,
Oh no, I thought she was acting like she was.
if you pay really close attention to the story, yeah, she's sort of losing it. But if there's something that makes her not as losing it as you would think, is that she's going through this traumatic experience, and I don't know if you remember, but they bring him, the people who took the people off to be shot, they bring him a shirt, her son's shirt. So he's wearing her son's shirt at the time when she says that. So it's a weird kind of a moment. What did I do with my thing? Button clicker thing.
I don't think you were using it. Yeah. You were using the computer.
Did I never even plug it up? Oh, I thought I had my
No.
That's so weird. So then we have the next one. Family shouldn't be taken for granted, but it's so easy to do so. So we have to think about the stories that involve family specifically, and talk about family. I wouldn't even see a story like Play with a Pet Dog isn't really talking about family. That's not the main goal of that story, is to talk about family. That's sort of the side thing. It's almost like in that story, his family is like his side thing, whereas the relationship. But what stories deal with family?
The paper.
Paper analogy. So the family shouldn't be taken for granted. Does he take his family for granted?
Yes.
Does it seem to be very easy for him to do?
Yes.
Yeah, so I'd say that works pretty well. Because of the general nature of this theme, you try to make them as specific as possible, but also as general as you think the author would want it to apply. Now, there's some people these days who would argue that, from what I hear, the in vogue thing right now in literary theory is to not even consider the author's intentions at all. I feel like that's a little weird, because they spent hundreds of hours writing stories and books, and then we spend an hour reading it, and then we're like, yeah, but they don't have any authority over what their story means anymore. We do. So I think that their intent does matter. And then speaking of intent, the best of intentions can still ruin the lives of those we love. So maybe we start, it's either love the people around you that you love, or start with what story involves somebody acting in the best of intentions.
They all love it.
Yeah, I think that's it. Because the family had the best of intentions, but they still ultimately ruin the lives of.
And it's interesting to have a theme that doesn't necessarily concentrate on the main character. But it does seem that like that's her goal, though she's writing a story from the perspective of a woman who's talking about her experience. I don't necessarily think that what she was hoping to change in society was women's approach to their own mental health care. I mean, I think she wanted to bring awareness to women that, like, I mean, we are far more complicated than just, having some man tell us, yes, this is what you should do. I mean, I think it's also trying to have the goal of changing the behavior of those who think that they know what's best for their family, without actually examining whether or not they're making it worse. Compromising one's ideals for advancement may be too great to compromise. This is a hard one. I think it's best to think of.
I would think of that
Battle
one story
Royale.
that you said, that guy removed his wife's home.
Yeah, it used to work really great for birthmark, but we don't have that anymore. And Gabrielle, you're actually right. That was really fast. Because there is one story in which somebody is really trying hard to advance, and that is Battle Royal. He's trying to advance himself within the society that he's in. He's trying to move up in the world. And at the end, if we didn't have the grandfather bit at the end, this last part may not be there, but he feels guilty thinking about what his grandfather wanted. He's like, I literally just want to advance. And I think he realizes his grandfather would say, that's all you want. You're just becoming one of them. You're not trying to move your people into a better position. That's why I've always wondered too, like,
I mean, because he essentially wants equality, but then he says, well, no, it's okay as long as
he backs off of equality.
Because he gets a scholarship to college and everything. He's like, oh, well, this is fine then.
Yeah, and he's like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say equality. So he backs off of his ideals just so he can, get that scholarship. Gotta get that scholarship. It's always one of the reasons and this is a side issue, I guess we shouldn't talk about this too long. In fact, I don't even want to mention it because you all love to talk about things. I've always wondered if rich white families should adopt minority kids. Because not that I'm saying like that, oh, you shouldn't want those kids. I'm saying like you should want them. The problem is I don't think that, who is it? It wasn't somebody last semester wrote a paper about adopting kids. I can't remember who it was though. Somebody was writing a paper about adopting kids and how it's important to preserve the culture that the kids came from. Was it you who wrote that paper? No? And they wrote that as a research paper. They were saying it's very, very important to, if you adopt like a kid from Haiti, then you would, that kid would spend a lot of specific time learning about Haitian culture, and y'all would make that part of your daily lives. And I feel like that is important. And I think too, it's like essentially what you do when like a lot of times when there's a white family who will adopt like a black kid or a Hispanic kid or somebody from China, is they'll just essentially whitewash the kid, so that it's essentially just a black colored white kid. It's like that's all it is. And I don't feel like that's necessarily what.
Like they don't know anything about their past life.
Yeah. There is no culture for them. The culture is just what they come into. And while that may eventually lead to, if everybody just adopted a kid from another culture, eventually that would lead to the society where we all look the same, like genetically. But we lose so much in terms of culture. And I think that culture would be just this big mishmash and amalgam of weird. I've always thought that culture is a really unique thing and really cool. And I hate the idea of losing it.
What I don't understand is why do they go adopt kids from other countries and like use foster kids here?
I think
I've never
they're trying
really
to
understood.
show something good, I guess, because they want to say that those kids are less able over there. They're like hungry and like kids here are in foster families. These kids are like just sitting on the street, pretty much.
Well, I mean,
not all of them.
kids.
Not all of them. I'm just saying, like, because if you can't really adopt a kid that's not a foster family. You're not gonna walk up to a kid on the street and be like, oh my god, I want to be your parent.
But to be honest, adopting from here is a lot harder than adopting from there.
See, I don't know. I know that there was one lady who used to teach here. She taught I want to say
Like you have to
journalism
go through a huge
classes.
process, and then you're
Well,
not
I
even
know.
it took
not-
her family 3 years to adopt.
Yeah,
a kid
one of
from
my
overseas.
regulars at Chili, they adopted a little girl from China, and
It's harder
It
and
took
more
them,
expensive
like,
to get one.
almost
to adopt out of
10
country.
years, they said. They said they tried to adopt her when she was a baby, and it took them a long process, like, to even
I think
get
the
to the time that they could adopt
easiest
her.
path to adoption, I think, in America currently is the
Black market?
is the becoming a foster parent first and then moving from foster
Yeah.
to adoption. Because I know a number of people who've done
It
that.
is because if you
That's
go
what-
back and adopt
Yeah, that's what my
it,
dad-
So like, I know a couple, they actually adopted their grandson technically, and they're gonna raise him, but like they had to become foster parents first to actually adopt him.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and I guess that's. I think maybe it's because the foster system already has a very well vetted process, and so if you go through that process, you're vetted,
Yeah.
and then from
in
there
order
it makes
to raise a
yeah.
kid, basically.
Whereas
like you have to, it's almost like
And
you
you
have
can
to get
start
certified.
like that.
it's kind of like sometimes when there are people who they get their biology major before they go to med school because that person knows a lot about human biology already. Although now that's actually not as common. Now they want sometimes people that have even like music degrees before they go into a medical, which is really weird
What a waste.
because they want somebody to be very what they call
Diverse.
diverse. In their,
But the medical field isn't diverse. Like it's not. You don't have a necessity for music. Like
that's not necessarily true. I mean, if I think about interestingly, the medical field. There are people who are surgeons and have been surgeons for 20 years, and on these big like robotic surgery things, if they put a kid who plays video games every day on it, those kids can usually perform the surgeries with more accuracy than the surgeons in a period of like an hour, because they're just so used to doing. So I mean, having a wide, diverse range of interests might help in various aspects, and the things you learn in music and about rhythm and timing and stuff that very well could help. The intricacies that you have to deal with there could help you to maybe even know the music
well,
of the
if you're
body.
going into that, but like I'm talking like usually like being a musician won't help.
No, not like a garage musician.
Right.
But
I
apparently
mean,
that's
just
what
knowing
they're
how
looking
to count rhythm, but that's not all. That's not what music really is about.
for. So we're gonna get back to it. Then this one, we might skip this one and go to this one. Society can endure great injustices for the sake of general welfare and happiness.
Oh,
Because in that story they basically have to. But this one is a little different because, and we'll talk about this in a minute, but essentially not every theme has to be immoral because not every person who's writing is emphasizing that this is something you're supposed to now get out of this and take out into the world and use it to change it. I feel like if you read Yellow Wallpaper, you're like, yeah, I'm definitely supposed to like go out and change the world as a result of this. I'm not supposed to let this thing kind of continue to happen. But Lady with Pet Dog, Chekhov, I feel like this one works for that one. Love is always truthful in the mind, because what does he say? Like, what happens to the cheaters in that story? They fall in love, and then what happens? They get punished, right?
No, they don't.
Not at all.
They-
The story ends
She
with
doesn't
them
resolve it. She doesn't resolve it, and it's almost like their affair just continues. She doesn't say
Because he
it ever
comes back
again.
and like,
The very
It's
last
almost
thing
like
that
a
happens in that
just
story,
start.
it's like they're just like, all right, we're gonna do this. Let's begin this relationship. We're in love, and then the story
it's
ends.
not come all the way.
And so to me, a lot of it. Chekhov was known for saying that he didn't feel like his job was to be a preacher. He said his job was merely to take a type of person in society, present what they're like, and then that was essentially the goal. Like he said, I just have to show. He's like, I've got very short space and a short story to do what I have to do, which is to show what these people are like, how they live. And he actually said this about a story about horse thieves. They said, you don't have anything bad happen to the horse thieves. He's like, that's not my goal. My goal is to show you what a horse thief's life is like, how they're generally well fed, how they really enjoy what they do. And I guess it's the same with like car thieves. He was approaching it more from the idea of this is what these people's lives are like, and that's what I want to show you. And so he shows this is what cheaters' lives are like. And in all honesty, the people we all know somebody who they cheated on somebody with somebody who was also cheating on somebody else. Now those two people are married, and they've been happy for 20 years, and they've had kids. Their life is great. We know that, right? This has happened so many times. We probably know people who are in a relationship as the result of cheating right now, and they're fine. Your grandparents are like that. They're like, yeah, you cheat with somebody else, didn't make somebody. And you're just, well, that's weird to me. But at the same time, you love those people, and that seems to have worked out. So you're like, well, what do I do with that? Because I'm told cheating's bad, And so in a story like this, he said, no matter what I write, people are going to come to this story with their own opinions. So when you read this story, you're like, I don't like these people. I don't like that they're cheating. And probably what was the worst part to you, I'm going to guess, was the worst part of the story to you when he's like walking his kid to school or whatever, and then like immediately goes to see the mistress. To me, that was like the part that really bothered me.
I was just indifferent towards the whole thing.
Indifferent toward the whole thing? I think,
Like,
literally,
I
I think
generally don't care.
my whole ideas have changed on that story since I started watching the show Mad Men. My wife and I started watching Mad Men, and I'm like, it's not that my eyes, it's not
about every story.
Well, I mean, you wouldn't believe, like, I thought that Handmaid's Tale would be the show that kind of changed my look on, interactions between men and women. And it sort of has. But when I watch Mad Men, I mean, it's just so real. And I feel like it's what we came from. Like, I mean, you see what's happening in the Supreme Court right now.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, well, we got to get Kavanaugh through. Well, you can't hold him accountable for, something he may have done 40 years ago. And it was the best quote I saw was somebody who, oh yeah, I took my ring off in the bathroom so I wouldn't drop it in the sink. Okay. I'm really glad I found it. Usually I reach my pocket right after grab it, but this one has like a hole in the pocket, so I want to put it in there and lose it in the hallway. Or in the bathroom, even worse. It's weird because, like, you have a guy like, Kavanaugh, and he's like, well, no, push him through the Supreme Court, but it's like, the most poignant thing that I saw that came in, somebody put, call me crazy, but I think that boys realizing that they may be held accountable for sexually assaulting girls right now when they're young, later in life, is kind of a good thing. So, like, if people start to think, man, you mean that me pinning this girl down to the bed and taking her clothes off when she's screaming might haunt me later in life? Oh, that's so unfair. No, maybe I won't do that. And isn't that the right approach? I mean, shouldn't that be the conclusion that we come to?
Yeah.
It's kind of, I mean, it's just one of those. It's one of those things. Like, we're still to this day persistent. And, I mean, think about it. Think there are people right now that are thinking, if that girl was drunk at that party, that's her fault for putting herself in that situation. But the guy who's drunk at the party also pushing himself on the girl. It's like, well, he didn't know any better. It's the same drunk people.
Yeah.
Why does he not know any better, but she should have? And I think that the ideas that we have in society about things are still, in some respects, still a little bit backwards. We don't actually treat men and women equally. And how did I get there from Lady with the Pet Dog? Okay, so Mad Men's made me think of the world differently because I look at the way the husband treats the wife in Mad Men. He goes out on her and cheats every night. He cheats on her like almost every night. He finally started feeling bad about cheating. He stopped cheating with this one lady. But this one lady pushed herself on him really hard. And he just started cheating with her too. He was like, no, I'm better now. And he's like, no. It was just like, what? And he goes home and she's like, where were you? And he's like, listen, I've had a long day. He's like, okay. And I'm just like, damn it. Just punch him in the face. He deserves it. But it doesn't happen. Like, it's her feel bad for him getting home late from cheating. And I'm just like, that's so much worse to me than, not so much worse than Handmaid's Tale. I feel like Handmaid's Tale is exaggeration. Mad Men feels real. And Lady with the Pet Dog, this feels real.
I feel like this could also work for what we talk about.
Talk about love, because that's what I thought.
Because she's
because
always
I wrote
like,
this before I ever read what we talked about when we talked. I had this for Chekhov for a long time, but yeah, Carver. Yeah, explain.
So because it's all about their definition of love, and Mel and Terry are like they love each other, whatever. But Terry felt loved in the abusive relationship, and Mel's like, no, that's not love. But technically for Ed, it was love. It was just really violent.
Yeah, I have their meetings. They understand that like all their meetings are true
right.
as well. Yeah.
In fact, I would argue that now probably this theme works slightly better for what we talk about when we talk about love than it does for Lady with the Pet Dog. Because the word always here, you have more people in that story, and all of them think that they're experiencing love. So this always shows that it's happening across a broad spectrum. Where in Lady with the Pet Dog, it's really just two people. Honestly, I probably should make it now, love can be truthful in the mind.
I mean, and
if
you
I wanted to
think
make it
about
apply to lady and dog.
And we just kept him calling, that's not blah, that's not blah.
Yeah.
But he
Yeah,
also
no, it
said
is,
some
it
really
is,
mean
yeah.
things to her. So while Ed was maybe physically abusive, he was verbally abusive, and for her, for Terry, it was still love both
But what
ways
about
because
what
it's
he
still
said
both
about his-
abusive.
Is anybody in a relationship you've been in for a long time? Like married to someone?
Well, I'm not
You've been married.
but
You've
we've
been
been
married or
into
been
it.
with somebody for many, many years?
Legally,
Like I'm talking like at least 7
but by
years.
state law.
Not
yes.
seven.
Okay. Tell me, did you feel like in the what we talk about when we talk about love story? Now, granted, you might not be to that degree, you might not be as rude to each other, but did you feel like the ones that were being kind of rude to each other and like, that's not love, that's not love?
Yes.
That was you kind of now?
Yeah.
And the younger ones was like you in the honeymoon stage relationship. It was like you're all of them at once. You're like, that's us then, that's us now. You know?
I was just thinking about that yesterday, and
Like I would.
I was thinking about how my relationship started and then how it is now.
Yeah.
It's like, yes, it definitely is like
I've
that.
been in a
Yeah.
position
You know, you
where
start loving each other so much, you don't even like want to bark in front of each other. And then a few years after, you're like,
whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've actually had like sat at a table drinking with other couples, so I was
Just
like
like
really
that.
there. I've been there.
Oh, yes.
And then, like you could tell, like one couple was new love, and the funny thing was you're reading the story.
Yeah.
It's almost like you're reading the story, and it's like you're almost from the perspective of that new love couple, and
I
you're
mean,
supposed to like almost
yeah,
feel
and
like
I've been
them. But
there
I'm sitting there
too,
like
yeah.
I feel like all of them.
Exactly.
Oh yeah. No, I mean because I've had like where I've been Nick and Maura and we were in that honeymoon phase or whatever, but I've also been Mel where I'm like the one who's drank too much and I'm like, you don't know what you're talking about.
Drink too much around friends, everybody.
Mine was the same way, but it was the same relationship the whole way with all the couples.
Yeah.
Like, I
Yeah, that's what, yeah.
Yeah.
Like me and my wife were both the honeymoon, and like when we first met, and then now we're also the older couple.
Yeah, that's right.
I was like, it's totally.
But I feel like in my relationship we jump back and forth. So we're that old couple that like is in love, but we also have those honeymoon phases.
If you ever plan to have a kid, you'll eventually become.
Oh yeah, I have to.
It's just not the honeymoon just kind of. It's not that it's a bad thing. The honeymoon just goes because you don't have time for the honeymoon until you get older.
Because we've already.
it gets to a better honeymoon, I guess, because you enjoy a little more.
It's
than
like
the time
retirement.
that the
Yeah,
little
yeah,
time
yeah.
that you have with your
You do as much as you can with it.
You know, it'll only ever
So
be
it's
us two, and then a couple of dogs. So.
I'm telling you, they're gonna start resenting those dogs. They're gonna take their dogs to the damn vet.
Those
Like,
dogs
you can't go on.
See, but it's not like that now.
Let's go on a trip. Oh, we're gonna bring 3 dogs.
No, we even have dogs now. We
got our kennels.
So we're like,
Okay, we gotta get to this. So, when you're coming with a theme, I think you saw that kind of when we were talking about the sample theme. It's very important to be responsive to all the details in the story. Some of these stories, like any one little thing, you notice like just slightly different ways the story works made like this act selfishly one not work for really anything greatly except for good man it's hard to find. Because that's the only one where somebody's really acting selfishly, and as a result, their society is abandoned. The other ones, maybe it involves selfishness and society, but they don't work in quite that same way. So when you're constructing the wording, you have to be very responsible or responsive to the details, very clear in the wording for it to work. And you really have to read closely, but it's important to understand what reading closely is. Maybe in school, did y'all do those like reading tests? I'm not talking about AR. I'm talking about like where you sat you in front of a computer and it would have you read stuff and then answer questions about your comprehension. No. But not the AR
They are
tests.
tips for reading books.
Because it would like have you read a book and then answer the questions.
That's
This one
kinda
like
like
just
what we're
test.
doing
It was
now.
almost like a little tiny mini star test or something.
like little
Yeah.
paragraph.
Yeah, and then it would say you read at such and such level, and you do like an 8.6, and it's like you read like an 8th grade reading level plus like half the year.
Yeah, so you knew like what books.
Yeah, and like I don't think that because what it did was it would not just judge you. And you didn't know this, but like it wouldn't just judge you on whether you understood the material. It would judge you on how long it took you. So if you got through this test faster, it would tell you your reading grade was higher. Like you read at a higher grade reading level. Like there's like
Because you can
currently.
read faster and comprehend it still.
Because I'm bad. I read like 5 times, and then I answer.
When I'm off focus, it takes me a while.
Yeah,
Like,
especially
I
in
found
that
myself
classroom.
rereading a lot of Chekhov's Lady with that dog.
I noticed it when there was something about like plot based stuff, like Game of Thrones. When I read the Game of Thrones books, I flew through those things. I read 5 books that are each 1,000 pages plus and I read them
So
in
I've
2
had-
weeks,
Yeah, I've had.
which is absurd.
I've
My
read
eyes were
series
noticeably
like that.
worse after that. But reading fast is not reading well. I don't remember a damn thing that I read in those books. All I remember is like major plot points. It's important to understand that reading closely is however long it takes for you to understand everything that's there and miss as little as possible. And that may require you to read very slowly. As we'll probably see in a little sample story I'm going to read you here in a little bit. It's like
See,
very
but
short.
reading slowly doesn't work for me. I have to like reread the entire thing like 3 times.
And see, that doesn't matter. It's just all about reading closely. So if, whatever it takes for you to understand the material fully as it should be, that's correct. So like when there was a Staples, for some reason Staples, the website, had this test that would like let you test your reading comprehension or your reading level. And it said, I read it and it was like some little selection from Alice in Wonderland. And I was like, oh, that's fun. And so I started reading it and I get to the end and I answered the questions and it was like, you got them all right. Good job. You read the 7th grade reading level. And I was like, huh? And I was like trying to put it together. I was like, how is this possible? It says next page. And I was like, okay, next. And it says, this means you can read Harry Potter in like 12 hours. And you can read this book in this many hours. And I was like, oh, it's talking about how long it took me to do it. I was like, so I was reading for enjoyment. I wasn't reading for, I was looking at all his like silly words that he had, and like galumphing and junk like that. And I was just going, oh, how fun. But that's not what they wanted. They wanted me to go as fast as I could. So the next selection, I said, okay, let's redo the test. And so it gave me a new selection. I was like, okay, how quickly can I scan this, get the information I need, and answer questions? And I went, oh, like almost like just skimming. And then I answered the questions then, and it said, you read at a 17th grade reading level. This is probably around postgraduate, pre-doctoral, or doctoral student. I was like, that's where I'm supposed to be as a teacher. That's good. I feel happy about this. But at the same time, I was like, but that's not good reading. So I didn't like the very nature of the test itself. I don't think any of you should judge yourselves on how quickly you read as a measure of success. It's however long it takes to understand everything. If you read it and you're like, I don't get it. Like, I don't even know what I read. I don't even know what happened. Well, you didn't read it. Read it again. And like you say, like, I have to read it 5 times. Well, that's reading closely. That's what you're
Like the
supposed
first
to do.
time I read it, it would be like me skimming through it, and so I get the gist of everything. But in order to get like symbolism,
In order to
get all those other details, I have to read it at least a second time.
Yeah. And that's the right way. Whatever it takes to get it all, that's correct. And it's important, too, to consider all the elements, like what I was showing you with the themes. If a certain plot moment doesn't happen, if Pete doesn't turn around and go get Donald, the meaning of the story changes. If in the yellow wallpaper somehow she manages to get better, the whole meaning of the story changes. Or even if something as simple as we figure out that they don't actually love her, they have bad intent, they have evil intent, and that's why they're doing this to her. That changes everything. Because it's not about like the best of intentions and still ruining things. It's about like men literally hate women, and that's what this is about. But she's saying like that's not what it's about. It's that men don't consider women's opinions and what they think they need to be valuable. It's not that they necessarily hate them; they just disregard them, and that's different. Yeah. Oh, I think you're right. No. Just moving in. So let's see. Another thing is to be aware that there's no one way to create a theme, and sometimes there's multiple themes. Sometimes it starts something about love, family, war, all in the same story. And never consider a theme that you come up with, some statement of purpose kind of for the story, to be like a completion of it, like, oh, got it, and then close the book and you're done. There's always more that can be gained from a story. So I already kind of said this, but it's not necessarily a moral. It doesn't teach you anything to know about life. Like, love is always truthful in the mind. Like, what do I do with that? I guess I could maybe consider that when my daughter gets in a relationship later, and she's like, it's so, like, I can't just sit there and disregard her love and be like, that's ridiculous, this person is stupid, because that's probably going to drive her more into it. Like, oh, it's like Romeo and Juliet where the families are warring. Like, I probably should have mentioned that. That's the tricks of finding themes, is you can use all the elements like we're talking about to consider, like, what is it that the author's trying to convey. Sorry about the concussion. Now, tricks to writing things: avoid cliches, don't use slang. All that stuff is going to be imprecise. I don't think slang in writing is ever, like, if you're saying that parents end up like their children, don't say the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Say parents end up like children end up like their parents, because it's more precise. And so, I already said that. I want to read this little short story real quick. It's by the guy who wrote what we talk about when we talk about love. It's very short. It's like a page.
Oh, son of a bitch. Come on. Animations. Got it. So what I want to do is we're going to read the story real quick, and it's going to be out loud. And then we're going to start analyzing it. We're probably not going to get done analyzing it fully, but we'll do at least some of it. So if you already know the story, kind of keep some of the stuff you know about the story under wraps. Where is that PDF? There it is. Popular Mechanics. So you can see it's only 2 pages, so it's not going to take us very long to get through it. So Popular Mechanics by Raymond Carver, released actually in the same short story collection as what we talked about when we talked about love. Actually, that short story collection was named after that story. So released in 1989. Early that day, the weather turned and the snow was melting into dirty water. Streaks of it ran down from the little shoulder-high window that faced the backyard. Cars slushed by on the street outside where it was getting dark. But it was getting dark on the inside, too. He was in the bedroom pushing clothes into a suitcase when she came to the door. I'm glad you're leaving. I'm glad you're leaving. Do you hear? Oh, I forgot to mention what we talk about when we talk about love, that he doesn't use quotation marks for dialogue. Was that hard to get on board with, or did you get really
when I
relatively
read
quickly?
it the second time, I used my own voices, so.
So you in your head, you're the same voices. Sometimes it does make it hard to tell who's talking at times, but you sort of end up being able to follow most of the progression of dialogue.
Once you get their personalities in there.
You know who's talking, yeah. I'm glad you're leaving. I'm glad do you hear? And he kept on putting his things into the suitcase. Son of a bitch, I'm so glad you're leaving, she began to cry. You can't even look me in the face, can you? And then she noticed the baby's picture on the bed and picked it up. He looked at her and she wiped her eyes and stared at him before turning and going back to the living room. Bring that back, he said. Just get your things and get out. He did not answer. He fastened the suitcase, put on his coat, looked around the bedroom before turning off the light. Then he went out to the living room. She stood in the doorway of the little kitchen, holding the baby. I want the baby, he said. Are you crazy? No, but I want the baby. I'll get someone to come by for his things. You're not touching this baby, she said. The baby had begun to cry, and she uncovered the blanket from around his head. Oh, she said, looking at the baby. He moved toward her. For God's sake, she said. She took a step back into the kitchen. I want the baby. Get out of here! She turned and tried to hold the baby over in a corner behind the stove. But he came up. He reached across the stove and tightened his hands on the baby. Let go of him! Get away! Get away! The baby was red-faced and screaming. In the scuffle, they knocked down a flower pot that hung behind the stove. He crowded her into the wall then, trying to break her grip. He held on to the baby and pushed with all his weight. Let go of him, he said. Don't! You're hurting the baby. I'm not hurting the baby, he said. The kitchen window gave no light. In the near dark, he worked on her fisted fingers with one hand, and with the other hand he gripped the screaming baby up under an arm near the shoulder. She felt her fingers being forced open. She felt the baby going from her. No, she screamed just as her hands came loose. She would have it, this baby. She grabbed for the baby's other arm. She caught the baby around the wrist and leaned back. But he would not let go. He felt the baby slipping out of his hands, and he pulled back very hard. In this manner, the issue was decided.
That doesn't sound very good for the baby.
That's the whole story. So, we're going to talk about this story now. We're going to talk about the elements, see if we can figure out what's going on, and we're going to see if we can figure out what this is supposed to mean for us. By the way, this story means something completely different to me now that I've watched Mad Men. Got to mention it again. Mad Men's great show. So, let's talk about plot first, because we're going to go over here to this theme PowerPoint and look at the elements that we have listed here. In fact, it might be easier if we go up here to the big set of elements. So plot. So what happens?
Well, he's leaving her, and he wants to take the baby.
And wants to take baby. And then what happens? They fight over baby. That's basically the whole story. Yeah. So that's the plot. Plot's pretty easy. Let's make this a little bigger. There we go. Can't wait to take this computer back. Character. So who are the characters we have?
Mom, dad, baby.
And see, I would argue that's slightly inaccurate. We don't necessarily know that this is the mom and dad.
We know it's a man and a woman.
Girlfriend, boyfriend, baby.
We see that they want the baby. But it very well, I mean, you never know. It could be a situation where it's, two people stole a baby and now they're fighting over who gets to keep it. We don't know that, and I doubt that's the case. It's probably the mom and dad. But all I know for sure is man, woman, baby. They seem to be in a relationship, don't they, the man and the woman?
Yes.
Seeming relationship between man and woman. I don't know if I need periods, but oh well. Setting. So what's the setting? It's a little harder to figure out, I think. And it's a house.
For their
house, probably their house.
Maybe their house. Do we know anything about the house?
No, it has a window and it's snowy outside.
Dark inside, snowing outside, or it was snowing outside. Snow melting outside.
Probably early spring.
Maybe getting warmer. Yeah, early spring, perhaps early spring.
Or they're in Texas and there's no telling.
Well, I mean, yeah, they would. Yeah, we have no concept of snow. Here, I need to fix this.
I mean, it snows one day and the next day it's melting, so it's technically still winter.
View, ruler. There we go. I want these to be like that. There we go. It's easier. What else is outside? What else? What gives us an idea of what the setting is?
Cars. She said cars slushing.
Cars slushing outside. I don't know. I feel like that wouldn't happen in a really good neighborhood. I feel like there wouldn't be a lot of dirty snow in a new neighborhood, or like a concrete streets have just been laid recently, unless it was a cheap neighborhood.
No, I feel like it would still.
Might still do it.
I mean, because there's dirt outside. Like, that's just a thing. Snow is just going to get dirty after it turns into a slushy apartment. Like, it just happens.
Maybe, but doesn't snow melt where it is?
Well, it said it
It says melting into dirty water, is what it said. So that is at least there in some respect.
I feel like no matter where you are, that just happens.
Well, so you may like maybe it could be a rich neighborhood, but I want to mention some things about the setting that I think are also important. Is that we have a bedroom, right? So a bedroom with a kitchen.
And a living room.
And a what?
It can be a
I don't remember seeing that, but I'll trust you.
What's a house?
What is the kitchen like? What's in the kitchen?
There's a fridge and a stove.
There's a fridge?
Stove, there's fire pot.
I remember a fridge.
Small window.
There was to say what?
Stove, fire pot, small window.
Stove, flower pot, window. What is unique about the stove? What did you say that when the stove's mentioned, what happens with the stove?
Well, it said that she moves behind the stove.
Yeah, she gets in a corner behind the stove. Correct me if I'm wrong. Has any house that you've ever been in that's a brick house that's been built,
I feel like you can't get behind.
you can't get behind the stove? Has anybody been in a house where you can get behind the stove?
My house. You can do
Well, yeah, I don't think that that's what it's talking about as an island. I don't
No,
see.
but like, think about it. If you're carrying a baby, is there a way that you could just maneuver behind your stove and have?
Well, my house,
Like,
the stove is in like a little, like there's like a back area
Where my
where the
grandmother
stove, you can
attached.
push the stove into it.
Can you get behind it
Not-
without moving it?
No. You have to move it, but you can get beside it without moving it.
Yes.
Well, mine is.
Radios?
The only one I've seen, my grandma's house has one, and it's not exactly connected to the wall, but if you're skinny enough, you can kind of shake beside the wall.
So it's not built in. Is it an old house? Yeah, I think that it's probably a really old house. And it's the 1980s, so it's probably a house that came like before, because this is a house that was built when the houses didn't have gas electric stoves. They weren't built in. If they had a stove, it was a stove you could really put anywhere you wanted. You could say, this is the kitchen area, let's put it here. Because I don't know if you've been in those old houses before. I've lived in a rent house before that, it didn't have closets. Like if you wanted a closet, you had to go buy like a shiffer robe, which who's going to do that? I don't know what a shiffer robe is. That might not be right. One of those things that's got the doors that open and it's got the rod in it. Wardrobe, thank you. That was the one. So you had to buy wardrobes if you wanted closet space, because they just essentially built a house you could live in. You move everything in that you need. And nowadays we have built-in closets. Everything's sort of built to be in that position. So I'm assuming it's a pretty old house. I don't know that it's necessarily a rent house, but it does have a small backyard, so it's not like in the. I mean, it might be in the city. I don't. But I don't get the sense that these are like super rich people. I feel like too, and this is nothing to say like impoverished people would not figure out that they shouldn't fight physically over a baby, but I feel like you're not going to see white collar people fighting physically over a baby unless they're really drunk. Because they're gonna. I say in general. I mean, people who are educated, people who have college degrees, people who've gone to college at least. I feel like this is something.
All the time about these rich people like killing their wives and their children, and I mean,
I'm sure it happens.
happens pretty often. Actually.
But I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I would think that if we looked up domestic violence numbers, they're probably going to happen more in. Like, they're probably going to happen in more impoverished areas than they do.
Or they'll just be heard about.
Which is true.
Yeah, paper
I mean,
in sociology last semester. That is true.
And so I feel like it's at least more likely that this happened. And I mean, they have a little kitchen in an old house. I mean, they might be super rich and they're just got this house because it's cheaper.
Maybe
But I
they're
don't
just
see
starting
that.
out in life.
They might just be starting out, yeah, and they're young, and that's why they have this kid. But I mean, they're fighting physically over a baby, right?
Yeah.
So the setting sort of gives us a hint of like where we are, when we are, and then what about point of view? Do we know like what the point of view is in the story? Does it seem to be is it third person? So we're outside both of the characters' minds, or like their perspective. So it wants us to kind of have outside of all thoughts. So we're outside of well, not all thoughts. We get a couple of thoughts. We get she would have this baby. She felt the baby going from her, but we don't get like their inner monologues, I guess, all the time. Yeah, it's more just what's happening, what their actions are. So it's mostly actions. So we're kind of left to be the judge of what's going on. Let's see. Do we have any symbols? Any symbolism going on? Anything you could consider maybe a symbol, even if you don't know what the symbol means?
The baby picture, maybe.
Baby picture.
When when she's taking it away.
I mean, we don't even have to think about like what it means right now. We can just talk about things that might have symbolic meaning.
I feel like the dirty water, the symbol of the dirty water.
Dirty water,
Maybe
snow, even
There's just the time of day because it says it's dark, so
dark, and it's getting dark.
dusk, and it's like
Inside too.
Dark inside. Maybe it's talking about literal,
Right.
like
I mean,
the
they're
morality
fighting,
is getting
a
dark.
yeah.
I mean, shoot. I think the baby itself could be a symbol of, it's a symbol of their anger right now. They're fighting. But all these things could have a symbolic meaning of some kind. The flower pot breaks. I mean, what are flowers symbolic of? Blanket? Was there a blanket? Yeah, there was a blanket.
Flowers could represent.
I feel like when a flower pot breaks, that's got to be symbolic. Flower is what, life?
So I feel
Flower
like
pot
the
breaks.
flower pot could represent maybe the baby because it kind of,
Yeah.
kind of sounds like the baby breaking.
Could be a baby breaking at the end. So the flower pot could be baby. Flower pot could be baby.
That too.
What now?
Because you have a relationship.
Or relationship. Baby is also representative of the relationship as well. So, I mean, the baby is the combined
what about the window? 'Cause
Window?
The window may not be bringing in enough light.
nor is the house shooting light from the outside, inside to the outside. What was the next thing you said? So we can move on from symbolism, maybe. Is there anything ironic happening? I mean, we can think about, is there any situational irony? Does something expect that you wouldn't expect to happen? When I say like that, I mean like you would be led to think a certain thing would happen and the opposite is happening. What did you say?
No, I pretty much.
No,
agree
yeah.
that They were fighting over the baby.
They were playing tug of war with the babies.
Yeah, that's what I.
I think if there's any irony here, it's both seem to want to be the one to care for the baby,
But they're hurting the baby in the process.
but are hurting the baby in the process.
And that is called
They just want the possession of it.
Yeah, somebody.
divorce. My kid, stop shouting.
It makes them want to
Stop shouting.
Is there any dramatic irony? Is there anything we know about the characters that they don't? I don't really think so. Is there any verbal irony? They're saying something they don't really mean? Like sarcasm?
We've already covered the.
Oh, take the baby. I don't see anything happening like that. I mean, I really think it's this one big situational irony. Well, there is a slightly either dramatic or verbal irony thing in the last statement. The statement's it's weird. In this manner, the issue was decided. And that's sort of a verbal irony from the narrator, which is very strange because it's third person. Because, I mean, we have two people fighting physically over a baby with their hands, and that's the last sentence we get. In this manner, the issue was decided. Kind of like lackadaisical, like, this happened. Things kept going the way they were. You just figure it out. Yeah. I mean, this is weird.
Like, she escalates their tugging, and says he tugs real hard, and then it was decided.
Yeah, it was like, she tugs this way, he tugs that one. In this way, it keeps going, and then something happens. I mean, it didn't tell us what happened. It just says, in this manner, the issue was eventually decided. It's very strange to me. And then we have irony. What was the title? This is weird. We didn't talk about this. The title is Popular Mechanics.
Maybe because couples fighting over a kid is common.
Okay, so couples fighting over a kid is common in society. Maybe that's the issue. Has anybody heard the words popular mechanics before in any context?
I mean, it sounds familiar, but I can't really tell you where I've heard it.
In the 80s, there was a very popular magazine called Popular Mechanics. This was a magazine about, like, I mean, it was essentially like, it was weird for this case, but I think it was mostly a middle to upper middle class magazine. It would talk about, like, engineering and, like, jets. Aeronautics was a big thing. Boating was in there. It would have articles in it like how to build your own pergola. You know what a pergola is?
No.
I didn't know this until I saw it. It was like a pergola was like that thing that sits in your backyard that doesn't actually protect from rain. It just kind of, it's pretty and it sits there and like you can sit underneath it. And I guess if you let ivy grow, it does a shade. But so that was a magazine that used to exist for like upper middle class people.
Oh, yeah.
And then tone, the only tonal hint that I get is in this manner the issue was decided. Otherwise, it's very objective the whole time. Otherwise, pretty objective tone. And I think that that is what we have to work with, and I think that we'll talk about maybe thematically what we have or other stuff, what we might choose for a critical evaluation from this little short story. I'm going to kind of take you through that. And from there, where I would go to actually write the essay. And we'll talk about that next time. So we kind of do the prep work today. Next time is actually figuring out how I would actually write the thing.
So what is it?
It's due on Thursday. But if y'all need extra time, you could, because I'm not grading those papers first anyway. But so I'll be going over the detail of how it works. Yeah, next time.
So
Okay. We're going to continue what we did last time with the story. We read the little short story, Popular Mechanics, very, very short. We started talking about the elements of that story, and we got down to just about everything. And then we'll just move on to talk about critical evaluation shortly after this. But I feel like I was going to say something after that. So many questions before we start going, or do you just kind of want to know what the rest of it was?
I kind of want to know what the rest of it was.
Okay. Any questions? No questions at all? Then we'll just get to it. Get the projector on. Hook it up. Somebody felt it was necessary to use all this junk.
Oh no, I took the video and it made me sick because you gotta bring my own. I turn it off.
Just so y'all know, I returned the other computer, so if you see that I'm not using it anymore, I hated it. What? No.
did you get another one? Or
I ordered another one. It's not here yet. It wasn't one I could look at in the store. They just only had it online. And then as soon as I bought it, it said it was sold out. I hope they aren't really going to be like, oh, we can't fulfill the order. We didn't have it. I'd be like, well, you have another one that's a comparative price. I need that one. Give me that one. They'd be like, that's more expensive. It's like, well, you told me I was going to get this computer. It's the only reason I returned the other one. I didn't exchange on it. It's your fault. I want to buy my computer from you, but if you keep screwing me over in the ordering department. Anyways, Best Buy. They have fantastic service. They always are helpful. Like if the screen breaks, they'll always fix it. If you buy the protection. Well, it's just because it's so hard sometimes to decipher their website. Because it said they had it, and like on Wednesday it said they had it, and you could have it delivered to the store by October 4th. Then the next day it said you can order it, but you can't have it delivered to the store anymore. And I was like, why? And when I went to the store and returned the Alienware computer, I said, okay, and I want to go ahead and get this. They said, okay, we'll do the exchange so it happens at the same time. So that's how we're going to make it work. And they did fine with that. Everything went fine. The moment I bought it, I went home and I looked at on the website, and it said they are completely sold out. And I was like, don't tell me that I had the one computer that they were selling on all of Best Buy. That makes no sense. But they had only been selling it for like 5 days. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, they are really good, but they're super expensive too. So, all right. So hopefully, let's see. Hold on, give me a second. I got like 25 people came in after I got done with roll, so I'm gonna have to put people down. Let's see. I was just gonna say skip it, but so many people. Okay, so we're really only down 2 people, I think. Okay, here we go. So, getting back to this. So we've done what? Irony, title. Did we do tone already?
Yeah. I think we finished that one.
The only thing we haven't done is an allusion. I wrote this, but we haven't talked about it yet. Do you know what an allusion is? That's what I wanted to start with this time. It's an element that they don't list that helps you figure out theme and what the story might mean, but it's not usually on a list of like the types of elements you should look for in a story because it's not always emphasized. I'm sure we know the word illusion, which means something's fake and it appears to be true and we see it and it's not really there. An allusion is a reference to an outside thing. So it's a reference to something that exists outside the thing you're looking at. What would be the case? Like, what would a good example be? In fact, a really good example, although it's a little more obvious, is there are many allusions in the movie Ready Player One to stuff going on in the 80s. Constant little references to 80s stuff. In this case, there is at least one allusion going on in this story, the one about the fighting over the baby, that relates to some other thing you may or may not have seen before, depending on your knowledge of stuff. Does the idea of 2 people fighting over a baby at all remind you of anything else? Specific. Not like when people get divorced, like that. Yeah, I know that, but some other story, maybe. Yes?
I heard this with somebody else, but I think there was a story in the Bible where 2 ladies were fighting over who was the actual mom of this baby.
Yes. Have I heard that before?
What did she say?
King Solomon.
Oh. Yeah. I feel like I should know that.
These 2 women came to King Solomon and each said, like, this is my baby. They show up and King Solomon had just recently, God said, you can have whatever you want. I love you, Solomon. You're awesome. Solomon says, God, I think I want wisdom. And he's like, this is why I love you, man. Take your wisdom. And I'll give you the riches too. You're awesome. You are just amazing. So Solomon's like, thank you, God. And so one of the first things that happens after that is these 2 women come rushing into the temple or whatever, the castle. I don't know what you have back then. But they said, This is my baby. She's like, no, she stole my baby. No, she stole my baby.
Yeah, because one of them rolled over on their baby in his sleep and killed it. So
Yeah.
someone took her baby.
Oh,
She
that's
said,
horrible.
she killed her baby. No, she killed her baby.
That's some panda action.
And she's like, that's my baby. No, that's my baby. And Solomon's just like, guys. I don't know what to. What do we do here? I mean, whose baby is it? It's my baby. Okay. Here's what we'll do. Somebody will get a sword. We're gonna cut this baby in half. You take half the baby. You take half the baby. Boom. Figured out. And then one lady says, I'm cool with that. Whatever. Other lady says, no. Give her the baby. It's fine. Give her the baby. And Solomon says, badoosh. That one's the real mom. This lady right here killed her baby. You get out of here. I can't remember if they punished her or what, but it's just so essentially the gist of that story is no true parent would destroy their child. And that is interesting because in the way the story ends is, let me see, do I have it on the PDF thing? Where's the PDF thing? Where's the thing? Where's the other thing? It's only giving me a few. It won't give me all my windows in Alt Tab anymore. I don't know if it's because I have too many.
Because you need a new computer.
That is true.
Or
Where's my story? Story. Looking for the story. Oh wait, it's a PDF file. There it is. I was looking for the wrong thing. So we got them fighting, forcing their fingers. Like pulling hard, yanking here, yanking there, pulled back very hard. In this manner, the issue was decided. So the last thing we get in the story, at least, is that they're both yanking on the baby. And we had already talked about irony, didn't we? The ironic thing going on here is both want to care for the baby, but are hurting it worse in the process. So maybe your biblical parents was a real idea that worked back in the day. But not, hey, can y'all in the back just not talk today? It's really hard because we're talking about a paper and it's very hard for me to keep my mind on what we're talking about and not listen to you guys at the same time. It'd just be a little easier since we're not talking about literature so much. Or doing the discussion thing. So, in this manner was the issue decided is kind of like all we get. And the irony here goes right along with that story of Solomon, especially considering that it seems as though both of these people want to cut the baby in half. Like it seems like that's like they both are like, oh, I want it, but they may end up cutting it in half, trying to both get it.
I feel like they definitely killed the baby.
Yeah, it almost seems like it's going that way. Now I don't know about you, but I think that this ending is a bit violent for me, even though we don't see the end. It feels violent. To me, too violent. Maybe me being from a family where we wouldn't fight physically over baby. Nobody's ever laid a hand on me in my family. Nobody's ever even threatened me with physical violence. I've never been punched, never been slapped by my dad. I mean, we got spanked, but that was always a controlled environment. It was, we had to wait 30 minutes to an hour for the spanking. So he wasn't even pissed anymore. We sat in our room just waiting. And then he came in there when he really didn't even want to do it anymore. But he'd already said he was going to. So we're both sitting there like, I don't want this. I don't either. You made me. No, I didn't. You can change your mind. No, I can't. Don't tell me I can change my mind or I'll spank you again. And by the time it was over, we were both really upset, and we just kind of gave each other a hug and went our separate way. Never once was it like a situation where like I'm in a store and I reach for something and he smacked me. We never had that kind of scenario at all. So I've never been, beaten, smacked, hit, any of that kind of stuff. So when I see a story like this, I think, no, that doesn't ring true to me. Because I don't see this kind of stuff. And I maybe it's because of that I start thinking of something else that you all pointed out was here in the symbolism, but that for, like, what the hell does it mean? Because it just suddenly disappears from the story entirely. They might see that something was in the story that was incredibly important to both the characters, and then just suddenly wasn't. No, they was usually pretty important. There was a picture. I don't know if you remember. Yeah, you remember the.
They started fighting over the picture, or she took the picture.
Yeah, what happens here in the story? If we look at it, it says. Then she noticed the baby's picture on the bed and picked it up. Scroll down. He looked at her. She wiped her eyes, stared at him before turning and going back to the living room. Bring that back, he said. I want that picture back. Get your things and get out, she said. He didn't answer. He fastened his suitcase, put on his coat, looked around the bedroom before turning off the light. Then he went to the living room. She stood in the doorway of the little kitchen holding the baby. I want the baby. Very concerned about this photograph that she just took. But apparently then she leaves the room, sets the photograph down, grabs the baby from somewhere. Now she's holding a baby, and he doesn't care about the photo anymore. He just wants the baby. Why is the photo there at all? Is this poor writing? Did the guy put in a 1.5-page story, he throws in a symbol he forgets about, an object that he doesn't remember is even there, and he's like, oh yeah, what did happen with the picture?
No, I mean, but if you think about when couples argue, they do stuff like that. Like when me and my boyfriend argue, I'll pick up something and he's like, no. And I'm like, no, you can't have this. And then it'll switch like that. And the thing that we were arguing about before becomes less important when something bigger is involved.
I mean, usually you'd hear something about that, though. I think let's just say, you pick up you say, listen, if all you want to do is play video games all the time, here, I'll just take your controller. And he's like, you want to take my controller? He goes in the other room and takes your laptop for school. This is mine now. And you're like, listen, you toss the controller down and you're like, let's go fight over this laptop. But you're going to at least acknowledge or throw down the controller before you do something else, right? Is she chilling there with the picture of the baby and the baby?
Yeah.
I mean, we don't hear anything about the picture. She doesn't toss it down and grab the baby instead. Nothing. It's like it just disappears. Unless it doesn't.
Unless the picture is the baby.
Unless the picture is the baby.
That's what I was thinking. Maybe the baby is a symbol. And, not symbol, maybe they're not really, I don't know.
They're sitting there pulling on the baby, but maybe the baby is the picture of the baby, yeah.
Yeah.
Let me go to...
Maybe the baby's really dead.
So maybe the baby's really dead and the picture is the only thing they have left.
And they're fighting over the picture of the baby, and she holds on to the arm part of the picture.
Now, I do want to make sure that I show you this, and then we go through the story real quick for those who maybe are doubting that this is even possible. Let's say this is the picture of the baby. Does anybody know what those lines are on the bottom?
It's a Polaroid.
It's a Polaroid.
Yeah, I just decided Polaroid sounds to me like something that kind of picture that you might actually care about in the 80s. Because if it was like they took pictures of the baby with a film camera and got them developed, there's going to be a whole roll of them.
Yeah.
The only picture you would think to fight over is the one where there is only one. Or it's a very special one or something. But in that case, why not just take the roll of film and you develop more? Because you can do that. It's just not developable just once. So the only picture I can think of is a one-time thing that you can't get back is a Polaroid. It's the only type of picture you would take. Because nowadays we have phones, babies are born, we just go snip, 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 snip. If I hold it, I can just take 1 billion at once and pick the right one. We have all those options now on the phones. And if we want to, we can take a picture of the baby and make their eyes bigger and pull their cheeks in because they're too fat. And then put sparkles on them and bunny ears, right? Because that's what Snapchat's done to the world. I imagine you go in for cosmetic surgery these days. They're like, yeah, I was learning, how do I get bunny ears? And how do you, can you make my eyes larger? No, that's physically not possible. That's what makeup's for. Makes it look like it is. So, let's say this is the picture of the baby and we rethink the story. It's just a picture of a baby, okay? Without even thinking about why yet. We'll just start looking at the picture. So it says, and I'll just kind of flip over every time I say picture. Bring that back, picture. Get your things, get out. Did not answer. He went to the living room. She stood in the little kitchen holding the baby. I want the baby, he said. Are you crazy? No, but I want the baby. I'll get someone to come by for his things. His things? Why does he need things? Maybe they bought things that are no longer relevant.
You're making this really sad.
Yep. You're not touching this baby, she said. Baby had begun to cry, and she uncovered the blanket from around his head. Oh, wait, that's an action. Oh, but that's what's happening in the photo. She's uncovered the baby from around his head, and he started crying. A little de-swaddling going on. Looks like he's crying to me. Yep. Oh, she said. Listen to how non-committal an utterance that is. That could mean anything. Oh, it could be like there, or oh. It could be anything. It's such a odd thing to put for somebody to say that's meant to have any specificity. He moved toward her. For God's sake, she took a step back in the kitchen. I want the baby. Get out of here. She turned and tried to hold the baby in a corner behind the stove. Kind of easy to hold a picture of a baby in a corner behind the stove. You know. He came up. He reached across the stove, tightened his hands on the baby. Let go of him. Get away. Get away. Baby was red-faced and screaming. Yep, looks like it. In the scuffle, they knocked down a flower pot hung behind the stove. Crowder in the wall didn't try to break her. He held on to the baby. Pushed with all his weight. Let go of him. Don't. You're hurting the baby. I'm not hurting the baby. How would I? I mean, even if we're talking about just a Polaroid, those things are almost impossible to rip. You ever tried?
Yeah.
I don't know how it's made. It's somehow kind of plastic titanium. I don't know how it.
You have to cut them or you have to light them on fire.
Yeah, you have to cut them or light them on fire. It's just, you know, it just doesn't. It's not gonna happen. I think I actually pulled something. Pretending to pull on something. This is what old age does, guys. This is what it does. Look forward to it. It's happening. I'm not hurting the baby. Like, how would I? It's a photo. Window gave no light. In very dark, he worked on her fisted fingers, and with other hand, he gripped the screaming baby up under an arm near the shoulder. So probably like right here, near the shoulder, up under an arm. She felt her fingers being forced open. She felt the baby going from her. No! Her hands came loose. She'd have it, this baby. She grabbed the baby's other arm, like maybe right here. He's got that corner. She's got that corner. She caught the baby around the wrist, this-ish area, and she leaned back. He would not let go. He felt the baby slipping out of his hands. He pulled back very hard, and this is the manner the issue was decided. And considering it might be a Polaroid, I doubt it ripped in half.
It probably fell on the stove. That was
Huh?
probably. It might have just.
Look, it is. It's screaming. Look. Baby's screaming. Baby is red-faced and screaming. Isn't he?
Did you draw that?
Yes.
You could have made it a little bit better. It kind of looks like he's yawning.
I thought that was a pacifier.
So did I.
Oh, I thought he was yawning.
Oh, his mouth is open. If you can't tell, I can't draw.
Give him some little eyebrows.
You did way better.
Maybe I'll have my daughter do the anime version of this, because she would draw like a baby swaddled in but it's going to be anime, so the eyes are going to be as big as the head, if not bigger. But that's what she draws. Yes.
I have a Polaroid camera, and if you mush it up too much, it ruins the picture.
Oh, so maybe she could even be saying you're hurting the baby. She's talking about the hurting the picture of the baby. Is it the old school Polaroids? Did you buy like a vintage one, or did you like buy one of the new style?
No, my sister has an older Polaroid camera, like the one you have to flip up.
Yeah, and does it mess up the picture too if you mess with it too much? I did pull something.
If you mess with it too much, then it messes up the ink inside the picture, or something like whatever that is.
Kind of like breaks, doesn't it? Like if you're
It
breaking.
just kind of makes it smudgy, kind of looking.
So it could end up being smudgy looking, so you could actually hurt the baby. Now, I don't know what the truth is, and I just think that it's important to think about the possibility, because we very well may not be watching a physical fight over a baby. We may be seeing the popular mechanics of what happens when a baby dies. I don't know if you know this, but like when a baby dies in a relationship, I think that the couple is 3 times more likely to get divorced.
Mm-hmm.
Something about having a baby, just you can't look at the person anymore without seeing the baby. You can't. It brings you down so far. It's just the only way to forget is to get rid of the person that you associate with the baby. It's a sad thing, but it happens a lot. Interestingly, I read today, though this is unrelated. I saw the picture and it was like millennials are killing divorce.
So they're not even getting married or what?
Yeah, I was like, I want to say, I don't know what I've got in my screenshots, but I think it was a screenshot I took last night. Let me see if I can find it.
What's the beginning and the end of the millennial? Because a lot of people.
Yeah, here it is. So somebody took a picture of this on the news. Like it was on the news, like some local news somewhere. It said, millennials killing divorce. Source, University of Maryland. They said they're getting married later. They have more stable careers and finances when they get married. And so there's 16% drop in divorce rate among millennials. Because they're, strangely enough, not getting married right out of high school when, of course, you've got everything figured out. They're waiting a little while until they have jobs and know what they want in life. Then they get married. Savages. Yeah.
Are we a millennial?
Technically, I'm like one of the first years of millennials. And I think I actually qualify as a millennial because I literally was like the only kid in my school, not the only kid in my school, but I was the only kid in my school who had a computer and used it. Like I was using it every day for like 3 or 4 hours. You're like, wow, what a nerd. You're like, you're such a nerd.
I never used
Phone stuff. This thing is a computer. That's what I did all day. Was essentially what we do on the phones now, but just on an actual computer. I was like 16-bit social media. I'm like, it's like doing social media on like a Super Nintendo or something, but like worse.
I'm not included. I think I'm on
Yeah, you probably a lot of people Generation Z because they're the ones who don't remember a time. Generation Z is supposed to be the ones who don't remember a time without phones. Where essentially, from the moment you were young enough to play with a phone, you could.
But what
Right.
year is considered a millennial? 'Cause I was born in the 80s. So.
Yeah. About 80. If you were born in 81 or 82, that's the first year as a millennials.
82 is the first year.
The first year of like the Generation Zs, I think, is like late 90s, early 2000s.
I was born in 96. So, okay.
People who,
Generation Z starts at
if you want to know the answer to the question, you just Google it, and that's your first instinct. Like that's probably. Well, I don't know. That's a lot of us now. So. Sorry I went off on these unrelated age points, but the idea is here you could be seeing one of two things. You could be seeing a story of two people physically fighting over a baby, and that's the popular mechanics. We see like that's the way things works. But it's more like, what would you call it? Like when something is meant to be a dramatic, help me, a dramatic, it's over dramatic. What do you call it? Melodramatic? A melodramatic version of this. So when I say like it could be like it being a little melodramatic, a little too dramatic of what really happens in real life. They don't physically like yank on babies from both sides. But I'm sure that actually does happen. It's just probably not super duper common. But as a metaphor for what people do when they fight over having like a kid that they've had and like I want the kid, no I want the kid. They very well could be a good representation of that in terms of like being a metaphor, not like people physically fighting over babies is a normal thing. But it very well could be him saying, here's the popular mechanics of what it's like to have a relationship where the baby dies. Both of them blame the other one, and they both feel entitled to everything, and they feel like it's the other person's fault.
So was this published in the Popular Mechanics magazine?
No.
Okay.
No, it's just titled Popular Mechanics.
So what we just talked about, that's an illusion?
An allusion would be the reference to the King Solomon story.
Okay.
This is what you would call a theory.
Okay.
It's just a theory of what could be happening in the story, but we don't have a lot of direct evidence. The only evidence we really have that could lead us into thinking this is the author probably wouldn't bring up a picture and then just forget he did that. Especially in a story that's this short. It's so short. He must have thought about all of the details as he went, right? Mm-hmm. Very unlikely he would go, oh yeah, what happened to that picture? Oh, forget it. I don't remember. I mean, the dude makes his living off this. So I may or may not end up using that picture theory. I may just end up going with the physical theory. But at this point, I've got to start thinking, now that I've done a lot of excessive thinking about the story, what should I choose as my selection from the story? I'll probably at first start thinking, what do I know about the story? What would maybe be the most interesting sentence? And I don't want to pick something that's merely representative of what the plot of the story is. Like the other day, somebody pointed out, I said, what should I pick? And somebody said, you're hurting the baby. Granted, I could do that, but that almost just sounds like an encapsulation of the plot of the story. You're hurting the baby. Both of you are. I feel like there's not a lot of interesting stuff I can do with that.
I feel like anything that you would do would have to be in the beginning.
In the beginning?
The story is so short.
Could we do like persuasive, whether we think, like which theory we're thinking, whether the baby's actually alive or...
It depends on what we pick. If we pick something that ends up becoming a good idea to address, maybe. But if it looks like that's going to just complicate our essay too far and make it sound like we're doing a conspiracy theory instead of a legitimate theory, probably should stay away from it. And like you say, the beginning stuff might be pretty good. So early that day, the weather turned and the snow was melting into dirty water. Maybe I want to take the symbolism there. Streaks of it ran down from a little shoulder-high window that faced the backyard. I'm probably, though, for my sakes, probably going to go with what I consider to be the most interesting sentence in the story.
Which is the last one.
Which is the last one. You might argue that's a little too easy.
That's the first thing I was
But it's the most interesting sentence in the story. And a lot of stories end with some sort of like moral. This doesn't. It's sort of like an amoral thing. And notice, I mean, there's nothing wrong with us doing it because we literally, I think we even wrote, in this manner the issue was decided, like when we were talking about the story. It was the only sentence we literally like wrote down because it's so odd and out of place. I forgot to put Solomon baby story. There we go. Ta-da! So if we go back over here, if I do in this manner the issue was decided, I think that might be, because I've got 3 words I can really work with here. I've got manner, issue, and decided. Those are the interesting words in the sentence. I mean, I can't interpret in or this. I mean, those are just kind of like normal article type words and prepositions. They're not super interesting.
They don't provide context.
Right, but I can look in further into manner, issue, and decide. What do I know about the sentence already? The sentence is heavy on tone of some kind. It's got this. Somebody put it really great. They said it in the other class. They said that it was a blunt and dismissive sentence. It's both blunt. Somehow the tone of the author is blunt in that we're seeing a physical fight over a baby, if we think it's a real baby. But it's dismissive in the sense that despite saying that this is how the way things work, people fight over kids, it's a big issue. Despite all that, the tone of that last sentence is kind of like, but why bother looking at it? This happens so often. It happens all the time. Why are we even talking about this? It's like trying to some people think it's like trying to stop domestic violence. It's just like it happens so often. Why even bother? That's kind of how he's almost phrasing it at the end. And so I'll probably think like the heavy relationship to tone here. Wait, is this even ours?
No.
Oh, that's ours. Okay. We are the ones who wrote it, aren't we? Illusion. Y'all were like, we don't even recognize this. Solomon baby story. So I assumed that was y'all's because I never wrote down the illusion. I was like, that's where we stopped. But apparently, I didn't write it down in the other class either, even though we ended up getting to it. So, yeah, we had the baby picture here. We had the same stuff. It was just slightly different. Y'all had more things that you said. We mentioned it was a magazine, right? Public Mechanics? Okay, cool. So I might take that sentence in this. But now, how do I come up with a sentence in general? Like, what is a good sentence to choose? How do I choose a sentence? If you've got nothing yet, or you're worried about what you've chosen, what is a good method for choosing? God, son of a ding-dong. You'll not show enough windows. There we go. So, I don't even know if I want to make this big. I'll make it big. So my suggestions for even choosing anything is start with a story you're incredibly familiar with. One you haven't written a sentence analysis over, though. That's the most important thing. And then even though you're familiar with it, reread that story. This time reread thinking specifically of things you might be able to underline that might work. Sentences that feel important to you as you read them, that express maybe some idea and aren't just simple plot. And try to find something that looks like it's significant to the whole of the story. And try to, as you underline those things, briefly examine those pieces as you find them to determine if they have enough complexity in them to warrant a close look at their significance. And sometimes notice the sentence itself doesn't seem that complex, like in this manner the issue was decided. That doesn't seem that complex a sentence on its surface, but where it's positioned in the story and why it seems to be there makes it complicated. So sometimes it might be stuff around the sentence and not necessarily in it that contributes to that factor, but it's all kinds of stuff you can be looking for as to what makes this important. And when you're picking your small piece, pick something you feel you could reasonably break down into its component meanings and connections to get to the greater theme. So you may have a lot of elements in there that are easy to examine, like when that girl picked the one about the house, being in the surroundings, she's instantly thinking, oh, it's setting, and it's a symbol, the house is for her, and I see this word decay, which indicates the decaying body at the end. That's foreshadowing. So she could see that with her mind just looking at it. Me, I usually will take a different approach. Instead of spending laboring, finding the perfect sentence, I'll often take a sentence that I think this could work based on the words I see and ways that I could interpret them. And these don't necessarily have to be exactly what the author intended when he wrote them, but it's something you could reasonably say might be true based on what you find. And I'll have to get to what that means. But popular, well-known sentences or pieces of work or pieces will work just fine. So if you know the sentence is popular, it's fine to use it. Like I might say, everybody picks this in this manner sentence. That's okay, just as long as you competently evaluate it. The problem is outshining the other students who will inevitably write about the same thing. And the people who turns in the best papers are usually those who turn them in early. So often the earlier you get the paper in, like, that usually ends up being like you're the one who's written about that thing first if multiple people write about it. Like usually in the Soldier's Home, a lot of people write about the bacon fat sentence. And a lot of people write about it. But then think about it. I read the person who worked really hard on it first. Then I end up reading everybody who waited till the last minute. And now I'm not saying, because I told you I was going to be talking about critical evaluation, if you haven't even started yours yet, there's nothing wrong with that. There's no reason for you to turn it in early if you haven't. Because I told you we were going to be talking about this, and some of you felt like more comfortable listening before you tried anything, that's fine. But just if you're trying to get in 3 days from now, maybe you're not the one who's going to want to pick something you know everybody else has already picked, you know? Because I'll be like, oh, I've read this essay 5 times. Yours is worse. I don't want to do that. And I suggest picking a seemingly innocuous sentence because there will be nobody that Nichols can subconsciously compare you to. Because every time I read an essay, I'm like, read this one already, read this one already. I mean, I'm going to be comparing you, at least subconsciously, to the other people who've already written on that same thing.
Well, you picked out my sentence. So.
You picked out your sentence. I gave you a better sentence on the same thing.
Okay.
Because you told me the direction you wanted to go, and I was like, but if we look just a little further this direction, same idea, different sentence. So if I take pop and mechanics, let's say I pick, in this manner the issue was decided. Is that seeable? It's a little small, but it's the only way I can fit everything. I realized that 3 interesting words I have to work with when I pick this sentence are manner, issue, decided. One easy way of approaching this sometimes is just to, whenever you're picking something and thinking about it, because I'm just in the thinking phase right now. I'm not in the writing phase. This is all stuff I would do before I wrote a word on my paper. I might decide, I know I've got some tone to deal with and some irony with the baby ripping in this manner the issue was decided. We expect to see the ending. We don't. That's irony. The tone seems sort of flippant. I can talk about that for sure. I got 2 things already I can talk about, tone and irony. But I'll have to find the rest in these words. Right now, I don't know what I'm going to find. But a place I usually go, and it's an easy thing to do, is just go to the dictionary. The real one, not dictionary.com. Somebody who cares. Don't go to Google and type manner definition, because it's going to give you dictionary.com. Don't even go to websters.com, because they bought that. I don't know how Merriam-Webster's did this, but they let dictionary.com buy websters.com. So when you try to go to the Webster's dictionary, it doesn't go there. It goes to dictionary.com. And they don't even give a crap.
So use a real.
Merriam-Webster's dictionary is the one I would use, because those people actually care about words and research them. It seems almost like dictionary.com is a cross between a regular dictionary and Urban Dictionary. Or sometimes they'll just say, I think that definition exists somewhere. Throw it in. I've noticed that it tends to be very open with its interpretation of what words can mean. So I take manner, I take issue, I decide. The first thing I do, I look up in the dictionary, manner. I find, just on looking at the word first, I say, you know what, the word man appears in manner. I don't know if that'll be relevant, but I see the word man is in it, right? Man, woman, humanity. And then I kind of go, that's stupid. Like, I'm probably not going to use that. So I think, it was possible, but probably not. The word manner could also mean, because in this case it means, here's something I want you to think about. This sentence is, in this manner the issue was decided. What I want you to essentially argue is not that if we take the sentence out, the story wouldn't be possible the way it is. But if the sentence was merely different and meant the same thing, the story wouldn't be possible the way that it is. If this sentence were, in this way, the outcome was determined, it means the same thing, right? In this way, the outcome is determined. Why were those words not chosen and these were?
It doesn't sound as, it sounds more scientific and not as dramatic.
Maybe. As an author, I would think that when he's picking words, whether the overall tone, like you say, is affected, or the words themselves he considers to be more important if he uses these as over others, he chooses them. The words are chosen.
Because when you're reading it, it's like it escalates really quickly, and it's like, and you can just imagine them back and forth, and then it just like snaps.
Yeah.
With that sentence. With the other one, it just doesn't do the same thing.
Yeah, there's something about these words that communicate that sort of just
Like you feel like
blah
you just got punched
stop.
in the stomach.
Yeah. And so I've got to look into this word manner and figure out why was the word manner used instead of the word way. One thing I noticed fairly quickly after the stupid man thing I noticed was the word manners. Good manners, you know? Like, that's not good manners. I wouldn't say it's good manners to yank on a baby. Maybe that's one of the reasons why the word manners was used to express the word way instead of the word way. Because he wanted us to see that the word manner in this method, he also wanted us to see the word manners. This is not the way people should act. It isn't. So in this manner, in this way, people honestly shouldn't act. Also, when I look at the Latin root from it, because they always say in the dictionary like where the word comes from, the Latin comes from the Latin for the hand. So I mean, I might be able to use that. I don't know that. It comes from the Latin for hands. So they're both using their hands to pull on the baby. I don't know if that's silly. I don't know if that's going to help at all. Them having bad manners and pulling on a child, I can use that. I don't know. Hand relates to man. I don't know. Like, those aren't really going to help me that much. But I'm just writing down everything right now that I can think of. A manner means just a habitual way of doing things. Kind of relates to the title, Popular Mechanics. In this manner, in this habitual way of doing things. Like, I always do this in the same manner. You know, I always get in the car in the exact same manner. I always put my seatbelt on in the exact same manner. A habitual way of doing things. In Popular Mechanics, that title means the way things work for a lot of people. So it relates to that word manner. So that might be useful. Mention baby violence? I don't know what that means. Also, a homophone of manner. You know what a homophone is? Sounds like that word?
Yeah.
I don't know if he means that. I lean toward him possibly meaning, us wanting to see that. Because in this manner, the issue was decided. In this house, the issue was decided. But it's weird to call it a manner. It makes sense if these are the people who are reading Popular Mechanics, because those people might own a house that you might term a manor. Oh yes, I live in Nichols Manor over on Crestwood Hill. You know, doesn't it sound like a real house? Like, I doubt these people live in Crestwood Manor on Nichols Hill, or what was it? Nichols Manor. Nichols Manor on Crestwood Hill. Baby Fighting Manor on Crestwood Hill. These are not the kind of people who would live in a house you would term a manor. So this might be an ironic usage of the word again, because it's meant to sound like a very stately, classy home, when it's nothing but an old rent house that's run down and pier and beam structure and resting on mud. And it's meant to be like, look, this is just a normal house most people live in, not a stately manor. You can tell by the actions. I don't really know. So he might be saying that word ironically to sound like manor when he knows it's anything but. I don't know yet if I'm going to use that, but that at least sounds really interesting. What now?
Isn't it a different spelling?
A different what? Yeah, different spelling, but yeah. But if I say to you, like, it's a thing that I can, homophones, they do have, like, you sometimes use them in humor. So, I mean, we can use them to mean multiple things. Did I ever tell you the joke that I made up? What time is it? Oh yeah, we have plenty of time. There was a joke that I once made up, okay? And I'll tell it real quick. Did I tell you the joke before? So we use homophones often in jokes, and since it's a sentence that uses tone and irony, I think that maybe the person who wrote the sentence appreciates irony. And one of the things that's in irony is saying one thing but meaning another. So if he says a word like manner but wants to think of another, that's it. But like, listen to this joke, sort of does the same thing. So once upon a time they were having like this really, really, really bad drought in Africa. I don't know what nation, but it was in Africa on the continent. And the animals were going everywhere looking for water. They were dehydrated. They couldn't find anything even to eat because the water wasn't feeding their food. So they were wandering and wandering. And then you see there was these elephants, and they were walking, and then there was a pack of rhinos. They were wandering looking for water. They can't find it. It was very strange with this elephant and this rhino. They saw each other, and their eyes met, and they don't know what it was, but they just were attracted to each other for some reason. And the moment their eyes met and they felt that connection, no clouds in the sky, it just started pouring rain. Pouring rain. And from that, it was like little pools were forming, everybody was drinking, and they took this as a sign. They said, maybe we're supposed to be together. Maybe we are. And they start like kind of hanging out together, and they start realizing that they really have way more than you would think in common, and they had like the same values, and they really, really did genuinely like each other. And so they spent a lot of time together. They fell in love. They got married, and whatever kind of ceremony that would happen. And I guess they were. It may have been hard for them to have the support of their herds. I don't really know, but after a time, poor Miss Elephant, she wants what many females of any species would want, and that's to bear children. And it is very unfortunate, though, that she met a rhinoceros, and to bear children, that's even possible? And she said, "Listen, honey, I really want to have children." And he's like, "Honey, I don't think it's possible." And she says, "I think it'll be possible if we try." And he's like, "You don't think it'll hurt anything if we try?" And he's like, "No, I think we should try, because then we might have a baby." And when they're talking about this, as they say the word baby and their eyes meet again, as they say the word baby, boom, the huge rain comes again. And they were already the drought was sort of sustaining itself. It wasn't quite so dry anymore, but now it was like the land was almost becoming fertile from all this rain. Like the huge rain came again. They took it as another sign. Like, I guess we should try. It seems like yet another sign that we're supposed to try. We'll have a baby. So they gave it a shot. And 18 months later, a little baby was born. Very, whatever they would produce. And so around that time, before they started getting pregnant and stuff like that, all these scientists had heard that there had been cloudless skies and these huge rains falling, and it had sort of erased the drought in this area of Africa. And so they start coming to study and see what's going on. At some point after the baby was born, these scientists kind of come into this area, and they happen to see the elephant and the rhino and the baby, yeah. And so they look, and he says, "Hey," he recognizes that this is an elephant and a rhino hanging out together, and a baby that, it's obviously like the result of both of them. He says, hey, and he hits the other scientist who's doing some studying over here, and he says, what is that? Points at the baby. And they're close enough, you can tell it's the elephant, mama, or the elephant and the rhino and the baby is theirs. He says, "What is that?" Other scientist looks and he goes, "Hell if I know."
That was a long setup for that.
Wasn't it? But see, homophones, we need them. Things that sound the same, but they mean do different things.
That was the longest story ever.
I know. The longer I take to tell it, the more fun it is for me.
Why did you just say
It's one of those jokes where you get to the end and the heart drops out of your body because they're just like, oh, that hurt. Like that hurt how lame that was. And that's why I think I love it so much.
Yeah, no, I was waiting for something way more significant than that.
No, that it all just ends with like one scientist looking and said it's an elephino because it's a half elephant and half rhino. But hell if I know what it is. Isn't it great? I love it. Love it. Sounds like elephino and hell if I know. I love it. My favorite joke because I made it. Anyways, so manner very well could be something that he intends for us to hear in both ways, especially considering that the sentence itself contains irony, and that is a form of verbal irony. So he might be pushing that in the sentence as well. There's another possible Webster's meaning where it could be an area of a section or a section of a city that a particular group of police officers are responsible for. I don't think that could relate. So I wrote it, but I don't think I could use it. So manner, I found some stuff with manner. Not super impressed, but at least I did find like the homophone, and I found like the way things work that could relate to popular mechanics. So that's good. Now issue. Bless you. Issue, bless you. Issue, the first meaning actually that I saw that caught my eye in the dictionary was an issue of a magazine. And I thought, well, now look at now that's interesting. The story's called Popular Mechanics. In the 80s, Popular Mechanics, huge magazine thing. Issue of a magazine, which could be sort of his implication here that this is merely the whatever month issue of Domestic Violence Weekly. You know? This just happens. You know? Next week, new issue. Same shit happens, different week. So you may just one week after the other this happens, or a day after the hourly. You never know. But it just seems like yet another issue of the same story we're always told. You know? So I thought that actually works with the magazine relationship. Additionally, it's something that people are talking about or is a concern, like problem. So this parallel, of course, hides the common nature of domestic violence. When you say something is an issue, he says the issue was decided. He means like the issue of like who will get the baby. That was decided. Could also mean, though, the broader sense in which we say the word issue. Like, man, this is a big issue in society today. Because it can mean both, right, at both levels. So you could be saying issue in terms of all domestic violence and all like fighting over children. But when I look at what the Latin is, Latin to go means it just happens. But another definition for issue can be a word for someone's baby or child. And you say, let me see, there was the best example I have is from Shakespeare, where a guy says, he's talking about like this bastard son that he has to this other guy in King Lear. And he said there was, what does he say? He says there was not a bed ere the womb was full, or something like that. I can't remember the exact wording. Essentially saying that a baby was conceived before there was a bed to hold it, or something like that, or like before there was a wedding ring on a finger. And he's like, the guy says to him back, and because the kid's attractive, he says, I can't disagree with the result, the issue of it having been so pleasant, or something like that. So basically saying like he looks pleasant, and the issue meaning both that which comes forth, but also the double meaning of issue, which usually means child, because the child is that which comes forth. Something issues, like a bullet will issue from a gun. Essentially, like that's meant to be that which the gun births. So issue is often associated with something that's born. And I thought, well, now that's interesting. The issue was decided, so the issue can be a word for someone's baby or child, so it has that relationship to literally what we're talking about, the subject of the story, a baby. So issue gave me a whole wealth of stuff I can use. So I really think, I'm probably going to go with this sentence. No matter if decided is a dud, I'll still go with this. So then I look into decided. Because I really honestly think I probably have about 600 words worth to talk about now, as long as I fluff it up and make it sound like I'm smart. I know that's very non-specific. How do I fluff it up and make it sound like I'm smart? I know it when I see it, and I know it when I do it. It's like it's harder for me to say like, well, here's how you fluff up and sound like you're smart. If I look at decided, I see that there's a difference between another word. It's not in this manner. It's in this way the outcome was determined. That's not determined. It's decided. And the difference between determining and deciding is a determined can be like fate or God determines something or just whatever was happening. Decided implies choice, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. You choose. So he says the issue was decided. This was a choice that was made. He's essentially saying that the two parents have chosen this route. It's not as though it's the baby fell and landed on a knife and now it's cut in half. It's not that. It's we decide what we're doing to this baby right now. It's not outside of the realm of our control. So I think that that's an important use for that word. And I look up that the Latin meaning, it comes from the Latin term for to cut. So deciding is cutting and then choosing one side or the other of that incision you've made. So it's like it's drawing a line in the sand and picking one side over the other. But I have the allusion to the Solomon story where he actually suggests cutting the baby. So in this case, I can relate to that allusion as well and say that the word decision may have been chosen because there's a relationship in the Latin to the word to cut, which brings us back to the Solomon story and how there was a suggestion to cut a baby in half, which in all intents and purposes is what these two parents who don't really care about the child are doing. So I think that sort of that made it a lock, because that gives me yet one more big element of the story that I can talk about. And because of all of that, honestly, I think it's just going to be more confusing if I try to shove the picture thing in there. I may it sounds more compelling, all the stuff that I found, if I just go with the non-picture interpretation. So I'm going to pretend like I never even said any of that. It's a theory I might have, but kind of like you said, like, do you go with the picture theory? In this case, based on what I found, I don't think so. I think it's going to complicate things for the reader. Yeah.
Would you recommend doing an illusion, or is it like mandatory, or? Like...
No. It's not mandatory. It's something I noticed in the story.
Okay.
So because that's there, I'll go with it. Because I know it's there. And here's the thing about if you ever took, and you had a competent teacher, AP English in school, this kind of writing was done a lot. That's what was required on the final test. It was take this little bitty thing that looks insignificant and make it seem significant. And so you sort of got used to this idea of just stretching your mind saying, oh, this is the case, when in your head you're thinking, there's no way they intended this. But the job is essentially like, maybe they probably did mean some of this, but you're there's a theory in literature, and I'm not saying I purely subscribe to this, but there are people who say that yes, there is authorial intent, and actually this is how I feel. There is authorial intent, so whatever the author intended and wrote, that is what the story means. But there's also the theory as well. Like, for example, let's say that we put a monkey in front of a typewriter, and that monkey accidentally types a new Shakespearean play. Or let's just say that it's King Lear, right? This great play, King Lear, or Romeo and Juliet. And you're like, holy shit, did he type Romeo and Juliet? And let's just pretend for a second that Shakespeare never existed, never wrote it. And now there's this new Shakespeare. It seems like it's a new Shakespeare play almost, doesn't it? It's in his style. This monkey wrote this new Shakespeare play. What? It's brilliant. And he's just going tiki-taki, tuki-taki. Has no idea what he's doing. He's just smacking a keyboard, and somehow King Lear pops out. Does that make King Lear any less compelling because a monkey wrote it? Or is King Lear still as fascinating as it is as King Lear? Do we now say the story is irrelevant because a monkey accidentally wrote it instead of it being a great examination of the human condition and pride? And that's the thing, is you have to think about this in a theoretical sense, that if King Lear existed on its own without an author, if we found it and we didn't even know who wrote it, it's still compelling. So because of that extreme example, I think that there is something about essentially saying maybe he wrote this, maybe he didn't necessarily think of all these things that I'm coming up with while he's writing, but maybe subconsciously these are the reasons he chose these words. He was like, it really sounds great if I say, in this manner the issue was decided. It could just be like, in our language, there are things that we sort of intuit, like the word decide, the idea of deciding, making a choice. Almost the word cut is implied there, decide. That's in the middle almost implies like a snapping, a slicing.
But
I don't know.
Isn't it based a little bit on our perspective?
Yeah, it's kind of like you have to make the reader believe the perspective that you've come up with. And is it possible if the author didn't intend all this? Yes, of course. But you're arguing that the author could have intended this.
Because of so and so.
Right, and this could have, because of the way I'm arguing it and saying, look at all this stuff and how well it relates to the rest of everything that's happening.
So in a way, it is kind of persuasive.
Yeah, it is a persuasive thing. And your thesis essentially argues that this sentence is way more important than it may seem on the surface because of all these other meanings behind it. Okay, good. Yeah. But don't act as though you say like, well, look, if we take the sentence where the baby, she's holding the baby, or like they're fighting over the baby, take that out, there's no fight. That's not what I want. That's you changing the story by removing a plot point.
No, you're supposed to like pick a sentence and say this was the author's intent and this was one. Kind of. Like pick a sentence, say like this is why it's important, this is what the author intended, this is why.
Yes. I thought you said this is mine. Like this is my interpretation, this is his. I don't know. No, essentially you're arguing, I would be arguing that this is what the author intended for us to see, even though I haven't had a conversation and asked him about every single thing and verified that with him.
But you picked that sentence from the end of the story, right?
Yes.
But it couldn't change the story if it wasn't in there. Like, when you were talking about picking a sentence last time, I figured it you meant from the beginning. But if you pick it from the end, how can you change the whole story if it's at the end of the story? That's what I'm confused about.
It's not so much change the story, but the meaning that the story is trying to get across to us, all those feelings it wants us to have about the subject matter and everything, aren't as strong or aren't as defined or aren't as perfect as they would be. So if he had the sentence, in this way the outcome was determined, I'm arguing that that sentence wouldn't convey the message he's trying to get us to receive as well as this sentence does.
So it doesn't matter what you're saying, is if you pick it from the beginning or the end, as long as it's like a compelling piece of information that you thought important?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so sometimes the real, I mean, you notice that in a lot of movies you see like the killer line comes near the end, right? You're like, oh, that's a good line. And you think, man, it's usually like right near the end, not often at the beginning. But sometimes when you watch a movie that has a twist, you go back to the very beginning and you say, oh, that twist was hinted right here. What he just said meant two things. I'm stupid. And that's sort of the way she wrote it in Rose for Emily paper.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sort of approaching this in two different ways, from the sample paper and then my way. And I would also probably have a paragraph, or at least work it in along the way, the tone that he's going for, the flippant, yes, this is a major issue, but it's almost like we're downplaying it, to highlight its importance. If you pretend like, this is so common, it's not even an issue, somebody will get pissed and say it is an issue. But if I say this is a huge issue, somebody might go, yeah. And they're not going to get worked up. And the important thing is that they do get worked up. So I'd probably add that in as well, and then also the irony, but I don't mention that. So my thesis for a paper like this might be something like this. In Raymond Carver's Popular Mechanics, the final sentence, in this manner the issue was decided, is important for the author to make his case concerning the nature of domestic violence and familial relationships in contemporary times, and does so through careful consideration of diction, biblical allusions, and cunning wordplay. Diction meaning the choice of words that he has, which that's what I'm arguing there. Cunning wordplay, it's kind of similar to, but that's me saying like it's not just the words he chose, but the playfulness that they have. And then biblical allusions is the allusion to the Solomon story. And my introduction might be a little more expanded idea of that, which is, what the hell? Raymond Carver's Popular Mechanics is a piece of flash fiction, that means a very, very short story, about a couple fighting over a child. What seems to be a simple disagreement quickly escalates into a physical battle that endangers an infant. However, just before the gruesome result, the story is capped quite ironically by a neutrally toned sentence which downplays the entire affair. In this manner, the issue was decided and encapsulates the entire meaning of the story, and is extremely important for the author to make his case concerning the nature of domestic violence, familiar relationships, in contemporary times, with the use of careful consideration, diction, and biblical wordplay. You'll notice here, and I don't think it's text, so I can't highlight it. It's an object. This sentence, which is the thesis, is different than this sentence up here. That's because I wrote the thesis thinking that's what my thesis is going to be.
But then you wrote the intro.
And then I wrote the intro, and the wording needed to shift slightly so that it flowed better. So I shifted the wording, even though it has basically the same meaning. And then if I write the paper and I just find something else comes out of that, I'll maybe change the thesis even more. But, I mean, that's how I would approach it. And so I have other things to tell you right here at the end. Because I know that the one thing you've written so far is a synthesis analysis. The critical evaluation I've been telling you is completely different. And here's essentially a laundry list of different, no. Here's a laundry list of differences between the two. So, the synthesis analysis, I wanted your personal opinions on ideas within the story. Like, what do you think? What are your thoughts on this? How do you feel about these two people fighting over a baby? Here, that's irrelevant. No personal opinions on ideas within the story, only how the author achieves what he or she is trying to achieve. You're arguing, does the author highlight domestic violence in the way that he intends, and is he doing a good job, or is he doing a competent job of it through the words he's chosen? Not, I disagree with the author's ideas on domestic violence. So it's all objective from the outside, not judging it on your own. You're just judging how well he did what he was trying to do. Another difference. Many different directions are permitted. Ideas can be all over the place, very generalized. In this one, you kind of need to be intensely focused on that one small aspect, that one piece you've chosen. And granted, you can do like I did, where you're talking like one paragraph's about the word manner, one's about issue, one's about decided, maybe another one about tone, another one about irony. And those are all relating back to that one focused sentence that you chose. So the whole story, the whole essay is about this one sentence. I'll have some people that put a sentence at the top of the essay that they've chosen, and then not talk about the sentence the whole time. And I'm like, well, you're not doing what you're supposed to do. Like the whole thing is supposed to be that one sentence you chose. Whole essay.
We're talking about the sentence in relevance to like what the author wanted the whole story, what she wanted us to get out of the story.
That's fine, but I mean, it shouldn't be you saying, look, here's a sentence that mentions guilt. Now let me tell you a whole essay about guilt and not mention the sentence again. It shouldn't be like that.
No, I'll talk to you about that.
Another difference is because they wanted your personal opinions, synthesis analysis uses first person and your personal experiences. Critical evaluation, give me none of your personal experiences. Don't tell me what you've gone through. It's irrelevant in this one. Just third person from the outside. He, she, it, no, I, me, mine. Synthesis analysis, I wanted you to talk about it in an emotional way. I feel this, I feel that. I was pissed off. Critical evaluation, no, you're a scientist. You're analyzing. You have no feeling. It's almost like you've designed an experiment and you're like, I've designed this experiment to see if, like, I feel like it's possible that people owning guns makes them more violent. And you take these guns and you do the study and you look and you look and you look and you come to your conclusions and you see the numbers and you're like, nope, people owning guns does not make them more violent. Actually seems to make them more pacified. Not what I expected, but that's the case. And so the fact that you felt that that would be the being reason, you should be willing to admit, oh, that's not the case, because it's all about the data. It has nothing to do with your personal feelings and like what you think is true. By the way, I have no idea if what I said was true. I was just making something up as an example. Strong thesis is not as necessary in synthesis analysis because you can go all over the place with your ideas, but in the critical evaluation, it's absolutely essential. You've got to argue that this one sentence is incredibly important, this one piece you've chosen. And then the whole paper needs to be about it. You can't just use it as a touching off point and then just go in random directions and never come back to that sentence.
Can your thesis be in 2 separate sentences?
It can, yeah, if you need the time, if you need the extra space.
I couldn't make it flow right.
I don't remember if this is how it's written, but the sample paper, I don't even remember if it has the full sentence in the introductory paragraphs.
She just has it at the top,
Yeah.
Which is what I did, because it's like a really long sentence.
Yeah, that's what I would suggest, is not trying to shove the whole sentence into the paper, just talk about parts of it and have the sentence be at the top like it is on the sample. Yeah.
Is the quote the thesis or not?
The quote is not the thesis.
So
The quote is just the quote. The thesis will assert something about that quote.
like why the thesis is
Oh.
why you chose that quote.
Yeah, okay.
The thesis is, everybody's thesis will basically be, this quote is incredibly important for these reasons.
You could say in these sentences and then go on about it. And
Yes.
that'd be your
That would be your thesis.
Okay.
In these sentences, this is happening, here's why. And the last difference, or there's probably more, but this is the ones I mainly could think about. The sentence analysis, opinion on whether the author is right or wrong is fine. If you say like, oh, well, their ideas on women's rights in the yellow wallpaper sure are crazy. That has no bearing on this one. You have no opinion on whether the author is right or wrong about his or her ideas of the way the world does or should work or does work. None of that should. We should not know what your personal thoughts are at all after reading this. Let's say that you are, I don't know, for whatever reason, some kind of monster and you don't think women should have any rights. I should not be able to tell that from your writing of the yellow wallpaper. Your monsterness should be completely hidden. I should be able to read that paper and go, this person is completely neutral on this. So those are like the big differences, I think, between sentence analysis and critical evaluation. This is how I would approach it in a scientific, clinical way, looking at the words. What do they mean? Could those meanings have more meanings within the story? Yes, they seem to. Will this be hard? It will. Will you get an A? Maybe not the first try. It's possible you could.
When do you grade them?
I'm grading yours last because they're hardest. On every paper past this, I'll be grading y'all's first.
So when will you start?
I'll start grading yours next weekend probably. And I should be finishing your papers up either tonight or tomorrow afternoon. The census analysis, the first census analysis.
I already got my grade on that one. So.
I thought I was going to finish last night, but we decided, I said, you know, I've got a couple of minutes. We'll go for a walk outside because the weather's nice. Met our neighbors, had a 30-minute conversation about Halloween. Somehow. And then by the time I got in, we were exhausted, and I went and sat in my chair and fell asleep and woke up at 5 a.m. Fell asleep in a chair. Almost said a bad word. Slept in the bed for like 30 minutes. Stupid. Y'all have a great day.